Calling back to order the bi-monthly regular meeting of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We are returning to the published agenda. We are now on agenda item 20, hearing on the Glenwood Springs Recreation In-Channel diversion. Looks like we've got the room set up so that people who are presenting can use the podium. Otherwise, we'll recognize directors as usual. I have delegated the authority of the chair to Casey Spall, who will be chairing the hearing. And so unless there is other business to be conducted now, I will pass the authority of the chair to Casey. Okay, Casey, please.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. So we're going to begin the hearing for the Glenwood Springs recreational in-channel diversion. And we have one member of the board who would like to recuse themselves, Patty Wells, and she will speak briefly to that.
Yes, because Denver Water is still an active objector in this case, I will recuse myself and be sitting in the audience. Thank you.
The other preliminary thing I wanted to address was the River District had filed a motion for reconsideration of the time allocation, and it withdrew it because the town of Gypsum ceded its 5 minutes to the River District, and Denver ceded whatever time it doesn't use in its allocation to the River District. So I think we're okay on that, and they'll have at least 10 minutes and maybe more depending on how fast Denver talks. So with that, in your package, there's a second pre-hearing order that kind of sets out the order of presentation and the time allocations under agenda item 20. And so the applicant, City of Glenwood Springs, will be the first presenter, and they have 45 minutes to make their presentation. They understand from the pre-hearing order there is no cross-examination of witnesses except for board members may ask questions of the presenters. So Colorado Springs, if you would like to begin. Glenwood Springs, I'm sorry. I knew that. Yeah, they do. They have some time.
First of all, this is a matter of procedure. I had inquired if it's okay for us to speak from this table. Would the board prefer to speak from the podium, or is it okay to speak from here?
I think it's fine to speak from the table, as long as it's recording.
Got it. There we go. I'm Mark Hamilton. Next to me is Kylie Crandall. We're lawyers with Holland & Hart here on behalf of the City of Glenwood Springs. The team that we brought with us today includes Jeff Hexel, the city manager for Glenwood Springs, Scott Shipley, principal of S2O Design and Engineering, our Whitewater Park designer, and Jonathan Kelly from Whitewater Engineers in Glenwood Springs. We're going to put together a short presentation for you here that's going to consist of Jeff introducing Glenwood Springs' goals with the application. I'm going to walk through a few of the legal issues presented for the board today, and then Scott will explain the design aspects, and Jonathan will conclude with water rights and hydrology.
And I just wanted to mention one more thing. We are starting a little bit late, and we're on a pretty short time crunch, so I'm going to be letting you know when your time is up, and your time will really be up. So try and keep within the allocated time.
To be clear, is the 45 minutes starting right now?
It started a minute ago.
Thank you. No?
Great. In recent history, Glenwood Springs was named one of Rand McNally's most fun towns in the United States. One of the reasons Glenwood Springs is one of the most fun towns in the United States is because of our river-based recreation. In recognition of the importance of river-based recreation in Glenwood Springs. The city is seeking to build features in the river and ERISA to support those features. 3 of the reasons why Glenwood Springs is wanting to do that are contained in the slide that's before you. One is to protect and enhance the current recreational uses on the Colorado River. The second is to create additional complementary recreational experiences on the Colorado. And when I say complementary, what I'm referring to is there's a wealth of uses today that occur on that river, rafting, kayaking, tubing, stand-up paddleboards, and fishing. The features that the city will consider will complement those existing uses. The third reason is to enhance Glenwood Springs' recreation-based economy. And Glenwood is seeking to do that through what I will talk about, 2 specific things. One of them is to create a flow in the river that supports an event. Glenwood Springs does not have that today, and such a flow would help support that sort of an event. The second reason, which is really important to Glenwood Springs, is that where we are in the river and the flows that we have allow us to be the venue of choice in July and August in the state when a lot of other venues have lost their flow. It is very important to us, and it is important to those people who visit Glenwood Springs. I am going to talk for a minute about the 2 particular pictures that are on the left, and I don't know how well you can see those from where you all are sitting, but that is the Colorado River, and that actually is a stretch of river that I raft with my family, as well as we stand up paddleboard in this stretch of river. And I wanted to just share with you a little bit of my experience. Not an engineer, not a lawyer, I'm a river user, and my comments will be to my experience. We are on this river in June, July, and August, depending on flows, and actually September occasionally. I've been in Glenwood Springs for 11 years. I've been on this river for 11 years. I would characterize myself and my family's level of expertise somewhere between novice and intermediate. In other words, we're not real good. But we're not rookies either. Our experience for us is best on this stretch of river when it's between 1250 and actually greater than 2500 CFS. For us, we enjoy this river somewhere slightly above 2500. The 2500 is the sweet spot for the commercial outfitters in Glenwood Springs, which take many, many, many clients through this stretch of river. But for us, we enjoy a higher flow, and it's very specific to the experience for us, and that is simply this. It is much easier for us to navigate in that river when it's a higher flow because a lot of the rocks that are there are submerged, and for us, when we float that river, we get a pinball effect at lower flows. The other end of the spectrum, at the lower level, that river can become shallow very quickly in spots. And again, it just becomes a question of being able to navigate the river. When those flows are low, specifically when they're below 1250, your paddles are hitting the bottom of the river. You're having to navigate in and around the shallow spots just to be able to get through in certain places. The other thing I would comment on for us, and this is something as a parent I get concerned about with my kids, because my kids actually paddleboard more than I do, is we have all the safety gear and they float this stretch of river, but when that water is shallow and you fall, if you fall, and my kids don't do that a lot, but if they do and you fall in shallow water, you're going to hit the bottom or hit a rock, and that's a safety concern as a parent. So the point here is the flows really are related to the experience, and I wanted to share my experience with you.
Thank you, Jeff. When Glenwood Springs hired our team to begin the pursuit of this RISD application, they'd already spent years in the lead up to considering that. They knew what they wanted to do, and we began to implement it. At the beginning of the process, one of the first things we did after we had our concepts together was go meet with CWCB staff in Denver prior to the filing. And Ted Kowalski at that time was very an accurate crystal ball user, let's say, back then. He predicted that we were going to have issues with optics. That's what he told me, and he was right. And I think that's a main issue today, not only with what Jeff is discussing here with the photos, but in terms of the hydrology and the water rights. I'd like to walk through briefly through some of those differences, and we hope to resolve, at least have some more clarity and resolve what we perceive to be some of these optical issues and drill down more on what the reality is of this application. On the slide before you, and I know that's hard to see from a distance, but hopefully it's familiar from your notebooks, are the 3 locations that Glenwood has filed for. We don't have time to discuss those in great depth today, but generally speaking, 3 locations from east to west: No Name, Horseshoe Bend, and Two Rivers. From a water rights standpoint, it's important to understand that the water claims for each of those 3 sites are identical in terms of both rates and flows. And to summarize those rates and flows, from April 1 to September 30th, the city seeks what I would call a base flow of 1250, which is identical to the senior calling right from the Shoshone Power Plant. During a much more limited period in the middle of the summer, from June 8th to July 23rd, the city seeks higher flows up to 46 days. And during those 46 days, the flows would generally be 2,500 CFS, with the exception of a potential additional 5 days around the July 4th weekend, during which flows could be increased to 4,000 CFS to support a whitewater festival at that time, which we would note is we believe the only city in the state that would be capable of having that kind of a festival at that time, because the other smaller rivers have since dropped. Those flow rates shown on the slide are subject to time limitations. Glenwood has proposed, and CWCB staff has agreed with the time limitation being 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. generally, which means that 9 hours overnight every night there would be no call from the RISD water rights. Another optical issue presented here is the 50% statute, which I know your board and your staff is very familiar with in the years since it's been implemented. We want to draw a comparison between, a required statutory calculation, which we have done, which has resulted in a 49% calculation of the flow that we would be claiming as compared to what's historically available under that statute. That statute, though, is with a statutory language is that it's the total volume of water represented by the flow rates decreed if it exceeds 50% of the sum of the total average historical volume for each day. So we ran that calculation. We came in less than 50%. Your staff agrees with that. And the importance of that means that this city would not be subject to the statutory call restrictions. That's very important here because one of Glenwood Springs' goals is to have an adjustable call so that the Shoshone water at 1250 can be protected, and so the city can have the discretion to call at rates lower than 2,500 or 4,000 as the case may be, which would be impossible if the 50% requirement applied. But again, that's a statutory calculation. In actuality, as Jonathan Kelly will speak to later, we believe the city's real additional demand is far less than 50% because the great bulk of the water that's in that 49% is already commanded by the Shoshone power right. And Jonathan will discuss how if you subtract out the demand from the Shoshone power right, the additional incremental demand by Glenwood is only 128,700 acre feet, which a lot of water on a lot of systems is only 11% of the amounts during the historical calculation that we've done. Moving into the CWCB's required findings that I know you're all familiar with, so I'll try to move quickly. In-stream flows, whether the water rights could cause injury to in-stream flow rights. Compact, whether the adjudication or administration of these water rights would materially impair the state's ability to fully develop compact entitlements. And maximum utilization, which is whether the adjudication or administration of these water rights promotes maximum utilization. We'd submit that although the staff has recommended the contrary on 2 of these requirements, that we believe we meet all 3. With regard to material injury to in-stream flows, staff did agree with the applicant's position on this particular matter. I believe that's primarily because there are no in-stream flow water rights decreed at the 3 locations that I showed at the map. There are in-stream flow water rights on the Colorado, both above and below, but not at this location. And so there's no direct injury potential. And as far as incidental effects, we believe that the proposed RISD will be complementary and supportive of both flows of water through the 15-mile reach near Grand Junction, as well as flow of water through the in-stream flow that exists on the upper Colorado above Glenwood Springs, and consistent with policy goals related to the possible wild and scenic designation above Glenwood Springs. With regard to compact entitlements, the first question is, what does that mean? What does impairment of compact entitlements mean? And it's our position that material impairment does not mean that there is absolutely no effect allowable upon the river or upon river administration, and that RICD water rights, like other water rights, are recognized beneficial use under Colorado law, and they're entitled to a priority water right that's entitled to be enforced according to the priority system. Second factor for material impairment of compact entitlements is that non-consumptive uses don't count against the consumptive uses. So the Glenwood water right in any amount does not directly count against the compact. Compact entitlements can be developed in other basins, and only upstream junior water rights are potentially affected. We'd submit here that there is no material impairment. We've claimed under the statutory calculation less than 50%. Under our what we view more realistic calculation, only about 11%. There is, even according to CWCB staff's recommendation, more development potential below Glenwood Springs than the actual incremental additional volume claimed by Glenwood's RISD. We have added at CWCB staff's request a compact administration provision that is largely consistent with what was reached in the Grand County and Pickens County cases before us, that will alleviate any risk that a call by Glenwood Springs would be made during a period of compact administration, unless the state engineer's rules allow for that. And finally, and most importantly, if the issue really is what's the additional upstream development potential, we would point out that additional upstream development can occur. Significant additional upstream development can occur. And this is because Glenwood has not claimed all the flows that are available during the RICD season proposed, that outside of the RICD season, there's ample additional water available, that Glenwood is not claiming water in the 9-hour overnight period that I mentioned, and that in addition, as will be discussed further later, the new decree that's in your packets includes a provision we've come up with the River District that provides for the possible call reduction to enable additional upstream water development. Moving on to maximum utilization, again, what does it mean? Our view is that it's a balancing of interest, it's not an absolute, and that recreational water rights are entitled to a priority water right, as are others. Maximum utilization includes conjunctive administration of ground and surface water, anti-speculation, and reasonable efficiency. We believe we meet all three of those requirements as well. This RISA will have no effect on conjunctive administration of groundwater and surface water. Glenwood's claims, as Scott Shipley will speak to, are not speculative. Glenwood has a defined purpose and a reasonably anticipated need. And finally, as Scott will speak to, both the use and the means of diversion are reasonable and efficient. Finally, and I'm about to run out of my time slot here, we've made a number of changes to the decree. I won't go into them in depth. They'll come up later today. I would spotlight a couple. One that we think is a perfect example of maximum utilization is that in paragraph 11C of the decree, it provides that reservoir water delivered from above us down to Glenwood Springs will count against the accounting for delivery to the RISD. And so that will supplement whatever native flow is available. But Glenwood, conversely, will have no ability to call for that. So it counts against and reduces the demand from the RISD, but doesn't place any direct pressure on upstream reservoir operators to change operations for our benefit. We also have a provision about cooperation with river administration, with the River District. That's in paragraph 11E. I would submit that that's actually 11F. I'd submit that shows Glenwood has no intent to use this RISD punitively and to be a good steward of its water right and to work with others as situations dictate. And lastly, as will be discussed in more detail later, as I mentioned, paragraph 11G is the new provision that provides for a call reduction for upstream water development. That'll be discussed further later. We're in the process of significant additional discussions with other parties. We're working on a memorandum of understanding with CDOT in particular. We're having very productive discussions with Denver Water. I know Casey Funk will speak to that later. And we have a settlement with the Hot Springs Pool, a major objector that is situated right at the Two Rivers site that's going before City Council tonight. Thank you.
So I'm a walker and a talker, so I'll stand at the podium if that's all right. My name is Scott Shipley. I'm here to talk about the design of the whitewater structure. Sorry. And we will create a new recreational attraction that will augment and enhance the existing uses which are in the river, in addition to creating new uses as well. I want to give it some context. We're looking at 3 sites, as Mark mentioned. Those 3 sites are within a reach that extends from the no-name rest stop on I-70 down to the junction of the Roaring Fork and the Colorado rivers. Those 3 sites all have ample flow and ample drop. We originally selected 5 sites within that reach. We narrowed it down to 3 through our vetting process. Each of those 3 sites has ample drop and ample flow. We have access to each of those sites and the ability to construct these whitewater structures at each of those sites. These are all feasible. We access through the rest stop and have room for additional parking at the CDOT site. We access through Old Highway 4, which CDOT has a right-of-way to and has indicated that we can use, and build and construct this site and parking for the Horseshoe Bend site on city land. And then the Two Rivers side is accessed through Two Rivers Park, which is an existing city park. Again, in the way of context, the Colorado River, as you know, is the largest in the state. That is true both with its regular return flows as well as with its 100-year flow. And one of the things that we discuss a lot when we discuss these water rights is, hey, it took 300 CFS to create a recreational attraction for the Longmont Whitewater Park in the St. Vrain. Why can't you do that in whatever river you're working in now? I think in the Colorado River, as Jeff has indicated, it's very clear that that 300 CFS merely would filter through the rocks in the bottom of the river. We have to right size the recreational experience to the river in which we construct it. And so you'll hear a lot about that today. There are many existing users on the river. There's commercial rafting throughout this stretch. There's several sections of commercial rafting throughout this reach. There's also private boating and private rafting throughout this reach, and commercial and private fishing as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is augment and preserve those existing uses in addition to creating these new uses on the river as well. When we look at those commercial rafters, they give us some indication, again, as Jeff Hexel has indicated, to what the existing flows are that are right sized for that river. When we talk to those rafters, they say, look, our experience that we're selling takes a nosedive below that 1,250 CFS. And that indicates, you'll hear today about a whitewater park that might be designed for 800 CFS. And that's for an imaginary river. What we have here is a real river, the Colorado River, which flows with significant flows. And below 1,250 CFS, the existing uses are not preserved. And so we've designed our lowest flows both through mathematical scaling to other whitewater parks, as well as through a realistic look at this river to match that 1,250 CFS. At that beginner experience, we'll create a small hydraulic. It's appropriate for beginners to develop their skills, for people from Colorado, Glenwood Springs, to come out and paddle on a daily basis. And at the same time, you'll see advanced people and intermediate people who come out for fitness or to start the early season part of year. When we talk to those rafters, again, they tell us the ideal flows for rafting are between 2,000 and 3,500 CFS, again, right-sized for that river. We have defined an intermediate experience and designed for it at 2,500 CFS. Our mathematical scaling, which you'll hear about, to that intermediate experience in other RICD parks indicates that that is an appropriate flow for that experience. At that experience, the wave will grow in power. It'll start to become an attractive feature to people from the Front Range and from throughout the region to come to Glenwood Springs and pursue kayaking. That will have a beneficial economic impact in addition to the existing uses that you see in the river today. The city has also indicated that they are very interested in having a river festival, which is really the primary attractor at these whitewater parks, such as the Fibrock Festival, which has 24,000 visitors every year to Salida. At that event flow, which is 4,000 CFS, we will see a very complex, very powerful wave. As the flows grow in power, so does the wave. That is the minimum amount we believe required to attract international competitors, such as we see in Salida, to the Colorado River to play in this feature and make it a feature of national significance. You'll hear a lot about the design today, and what we've chosen to use for our designs are U structures, and these should be familiar to you. Virtually every whitewater RICD park in the state of Colorado utilizes U structures as the primary attractive feature. They're very versatile structures that allow us to create recreation at lower flows, and through widening slots, enhance that recreational opportunity as the flows grow in power. One of the other neat things about these U structures is they have very well-known and well-defined properties. There are many of them in the state of Colorado. Pretty much every whitewater designer knows very well how to size and scale these structures and what the design process is. The design process that we use to size and scale these structures, as well as to set the minimum required flows, uses the broad-crested weir equation as well as the freestyle surface equation. You'll hear about that today. One of the things that you'll hear is that this broad-crested weir equation is far too simple of an equation to size and scale these structures. We've been down that road before. McLaughlin, who was the CWCB's expert in the Steamboat Springs case, said, look, this seems a little simple. We should look at it in a different way. At the same time, when the river, that structure had already been constructed, when we went out there and took pictures at the claim flows, what we found is that this equation is an accurate predictor of the depth of flows and quantity of flows that flow through these structures at the claimed flows. So we can go down this process of saying, is that good or is that bad? But it does match our models. It does match our experience. This is something that we have done before. One of the things that you'll hear is that the morphology, you'll see a 2D model and you'll hear that the morphology of the river as it exists today is not appropriate for that broad-crested weir. But bear in mind, we're going to build a broad-crested weir. At that point in time, the morphology will be appropriate to use this equation, and that is why we've designed it this way. One of the things you'll also hear about is how do we relate, one of the challenges is how do we relate the quantity of flow claimed to the recreational experiences there? How do we know that we're claiming the minimum amount of flow necessary to meet the city's intended objectives? We use a thing called the Freestyle Surface Index, which was designed to do specifically this. And what you'll hear is that this is not generally accepted by whitewater design engineers around the world. That is simply not true. This equation was commissioned to be created by the International Canoe Federation. It was designed by Goodman and Parr. Parr is a hydraulics professor at the University of Nottingham in England. He was the designer of the Nottingham and Teesside Whitewater Parks, which hosted the 1995 World Championships. He created this in order to quantify the potential of a given reach to create whitewater recreation, a given reach of rivers. So it is the one metric out there that has been presented that relates recreational experience and flow rate to the objectives that you desire. It was also used by McLaughlin to create the CWCB's own policy for RICDs. He adapted it through the use of the power index. And you saw that he testified to that in the Steamboat Springs case. Gary Lacey used the power surface index in both the Steamboat Springs case and the Durango cases. I have used it extensively in my design work, including in the Durango RICD case and this one. So this is a metric that is very well accepted and that very well relates recreational experience to the quantity of water used. We adapted it because it was used for longer reaches of river. We've adapted it to freestyle courses using the Freestyle Surface Index. To verify that it is actually valid, we tried to see if it correlated to other whitewater parks. And what you see here is very good correlation between the claimed flows at other RICD parks in the state of Colorado and the claimed experiences in those parks. And we've actually used that to size and scale our structures for this river. So this is a very accurate metric for what it is that we intend to use it for. One of the other things you'll hear about is the idea of a bypass channel. Because of this, the existing float traffic, some of it being fishermen and people who are not experienced whitewater users, we've included a bypass channel. This is the channel that you see in the existing Glenwood Springs Whitewater Park. It has been very successful in allowing people to bypass the main hydraulic. It is also in the Grand County RICD Whitewater Park, and the flows claimed there included the bypass flows as well as the main hydraulic flows. I believe this is an integral part. This is an essential part of having the main hydraulic in this river. And so the flows claimed for that bypass channel are necessary not only for the existing uses, but also for habitat reasons to allow for fish passage as well. One of the things that people have criticized is that we may have claimed 35% too much flow. You'll hear that today. SG1, Mr. Shepard, who will testify today, has claimed that those flows that we claim should be decreased because of the use of the bypass channel. By using our own metrics, I believe that he calculated that inaccurately. If you look at the Freestyle Surface Index, whether you consider just the main hydraulic and the width of the main hydraulic or the entire flow of the river and the width of the entire flow of the river, we get very similar experiences predicted by that Freestyle Surface Index. So we believe that we're justified in claiming that water and that we will provide the intended recreational experience. You will also hear some amount of criticism today about our method of design. And we've gone through what I believe to be a very appropriate process for that design. And some of the things that will be brought up will be criticisms about the calculations for scour pads, for erosion, for piping, these sorts of things. And just bear in mind that these are the final calculations that you use to size your scour pad and your erosion protection. Many of you are diverters. You're familiar with the idea that these are basic calculations and that we can implement those at the appropriate time. If you don't believe we can do it, for a 1.5 foot drop structure in the Colorado River. Bear in mind, people do this for 100-foot high dams all around the world. And so these are simply standard calculations. We've been working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to ensure that there will be fish passage past these structures. It's something we've been working on other whitewater parks as well. We believe we have engineering solutions to that problem to provide that connectivity, and all of our results so far indicate that. We will use a bypass channel that is a roughened fish passage. And if you, just to give an example, you'll hear from Mr. Shepard today, who used that same solution on the Bow River Dam in Calgary. So this is a solution that has been used before, has been vetted by some of the opposers experts as well. Lastly, there will be some indication today that we will bust the 100-year floodplain. We do have preliminary flood models. Those preliminary flood models do indicate that we can meet all floodplain development permitting requirements, be it a no rise at the Two Rivers sites or within the floodplain development rules at the other two sites. And so this is a project that is very feasible and that can be constructed in the United States. And so based on that, I believe we've designed whitewater parks with structures that have been shown to capture or divert, capture, control, and place to beneficial use the flows of the Colorado River. We believe that those flows are the minimum amount necessary to meet the applicant's intended recreational purpose. We believe that it also passes a reasonableness test. If you look at the 1250 CFS, that is how the river operates today, and that is how we have designed this whitewater park. Thank you very much.
So as Mark said, my name is Jonathan Kelly. I'm with Whitewater Engineers. My role in the project has been to evaluate the hydrology associated with the flow claims and the water rights implication of the RISD application. These are some of the topics I'll be touching upon here this morning. The rates and time periods of the flow claims, putting the flow claims in perspective, which you've kind of got that's a big message here because of the size of the river, and a RISD claim has never been made on a river at this location of this magnitude. And so I think it's appropriate to put that into perspective. And then we'll provide the basis for the findings that the flow claims do not materially impact Colorado's ability to develop its compact entitlement, as well as that the flow claims promote maximum utilization. With regard to the rates and time periods, as Scott Shipley just testified to, the flow rates were determined based upon establishing, enhancing, protecting, and enhancing three different recreational experiences on the river system. Sorry. And Whitewater's role was to establish when those flow claim periods would be available based upon the historically available flows through the Whitewater Park locations, as well as the timing of the recreational boating demand in and around Glenwood Springs. This is what we affectionately refer to as the submarine graph, which demonstrates where our flow claims are. Some considerations when developing the time periods for the flow claims, where even though not required, we kept all of our flow claims below the historical hydrograph. The historical hydrograph was established based upon a 30-year representative study period from 1984 through 2013. We wanted to make sure that we limited the rates and durations above the historic Shoshone call of 1250 CFS. And you can see that the large block at the bottom, Mark, this is the 1250 CFS one flow rate, which is consistent with the senior Shoshone call. The flow rates above that, the 2500, and then the event flows for 5-day period at 4000 CFS. In total, that period above the 1250 is limited to 46 days. One of the other guiding principles when we were establishing these time periods were from the rafting industry. And they told us that the rafting quality of the experience decreases below 2500 CFS. Even though they will still run the river at flows below that rate, they said to the degree that those flows can be protected for as long as the hydrology supports, that would be a benefit to that industry. And lastly, as I already touched upon, we wanted to create an event flow that could be perhaps an annual festival on the river system when other river systems would not be able to support such a festival around the July 4th weekend. And the final criterion was to stay below the 50% statutory threshold, which was done, as Mark said, to give us flexibility on what rates we could call for, but also to protect other users of the stream and keep that flow available to others. So even though the staff did agree that based upon the calculation methods, we met the statutory definition of staying below the 50% threshold at all 3 locations. And in doing so, we are preserving more than half of the available flow volume at these park sites for future upstream development. And because it's non-consumptive, of course, we don't have any effect on downstream development. But even though that 50% was met, it's important to look at the fact that the actual new claim volumes on the stream system are much less than that. When we take out the Shoshone call, we are limited to only 128,700 acre feet, as opposed to over 580,000 acre feet at the 50% threshold. So that knocks it down from about 49% all the way down to 11%. Again, we are limiting our duration of our flow claims above the senior Shoshone right of 1,250 to the 46 days. And we also have additional restrictions on the time of day operations. So even during a period when the Glenwood Rissad may call, there would still be opportunities for diversions upstream that would be junior to operate during those off hours. This is a visual to show the effect on our submarine if you overlay this senior Shoshone call. You can see that we end up being limited to 46 days above that flow rate with a volume of about 129,000 acre feet. Again, to put the flow claims into perspective with regard to the river system, during the Rissad season, according to the statutory definition, we're at 49%, so under the 50% threshold. But of course, our season is limited to 183 days. If you look at it on a year-round basis, that 49% goes down to 37%. In addition, if you factor in the Shoshone senior call, that flow rate, as we've already kind of referred to, goes down to 11% in terms of new flow claims on the river season during the Rissad season. If you then extrapolate that for the entire year-round period, that 11% actually goes down to 8%. We believe that there will be a minimal effect on free river conditions as a result of the Rissad, in part because we have limited our flow rates above the senior Shoshone to a 46-day period. Using our 30-year study period, we calculated that there would be an average of only 15 days where there was potential new call on the river system. We do understand that some of the days, historically speaking, Shoshone may not have always called when they could have called. But in order to make it an apples-to-apples comparison, we looked at our potential calls as well as Shoshone's potential calls. In the future, or looking in the past, why they may not have called during certain periods when they could have, may also result in us not calling during the same periods because of some of the decree provisions, including the call reduction measures, the cooperative administration, and the non-stacking, which would all further reduce our potential calls in the future. Another important aspect is when these 15 days would most likely occur. And primarily, we're finding that they would occur in July. In developing a water supply upstream of the Rissad, most people would assume that there are free river conditions in May and June, but they would have to augment in July because Shoshone would oftentimes call during that period. So even any upstream development is already going to have to augment in that period. What we're finding is that perhaps they would have to implement that augmentation plan a little bit more frequently in, say, an average year. In a wet year, there wouldn't be a call at all. In a dry year, Shoshone would probably already be calling out those water rights. And again, we have limited the higher flow claims in both frequency and duration. In terms of the frequency of the availability of these flows at different rates, the 1250 is available 92% of the time during the flow claim period. The 2500 CFS is available 60% of the time. And then for the 5-day period where the event flows would occur are available 39% of the time. However, even during an event, we may be calling for 4,000 CFS. A 2013 water right may not be able to pull enough water to meet that call, but that's the importance of having the flexibility, and we would still have an enhanced recreational experience at flows between 2,500 and 4,000 CFS. To come to the finding that there was no material impairment of Colorado's ability to develop its compact entitlement, as Mark touched upon, we've incorporated the CWCB staff's requested language regarding compact administration. The only water rights that we have a potential effect on are those in Division 5 upstream of the RISD. Regarding compact entitlements in any of the other divisions or downstream of us, there's zero effect. CWCB staff agrees that there is sufficient downstream development to consumptively use the additional water shepherded through the RISD locations. And it's important to also recognize that many projects upstream, including Trans Mountain diversions, are senior to the RISD. And we have provisions in there as far as non-opposition that if they need to file for junior water rights in order to perfect some of those conditional claims, that we would not oppose those applications. Oh, this is the slide that didn't come through. Technical glitch. This was simply to show that when we, from a compact entitlement standpoint, we're interested in the flows in the entire Colorado River watershed, including its tributaries at the state line. And if we look at from that perspective, our flows drop from the 49% during the RISD season down to 13% at the state line when including all the tributaries to the Colorado. And similarly, the 11% when you subtract out the Shoshone drops all the way down to 3% at the state line for the effect on the compact entitlement. Regarding promotion of maximum utilization, as Mark said, we do not believe that that means that a water right cannot place a call on the river, or else there's not much value in having a water right. We have placed the location of the RISD immediately downstream of the Shoshone, means that we're basically in the shadow of that call for 137 days out of the 183 days of our RISD claim period. So we're automatically placing a second non-consumptive beneficial use on that same water that's already being called through the system. And except with the exception of the 46 days, and as we've discussed through a 30-year period of record, we average only 15 days of additional call, and that's potential call. And that call would be further reduced by the provisions that Mark has touched upon that we're including in the proposed decree. Lastly, the beneficial use is non-consumptive, thereby allowing downstream development consumptive uses. And the staff has agreed that appropriate downstream development potential does exist. Lastly, for perspective, because of where Glenwood Springs is located on the Colorado River system, the magnitude of our flow claims appears very large, and that's the optics issue that we've been touching upon. However, when you look at it as a percentage of the available flow, since we are staying beneath the 50%, we're already taking a conservative approach in terms of allocation of the available flows at the location. But the lens really that we believe that the RISD should be viewed is the new claims above the Shoshone existing senior right. which is indicated here by the hatching. When you do that, we limit our potential new calls on the system to 128,700. And you can see through that lens, the graph shows that our flow claims are small by any standard. Thank you.
You have 3 minutes remaining. Okay.
Mark, can you direct me to that non-opposition provision? I couldn't locate it in the packet.
I apologize, I was moving too quickly when I got to that point. The non-opposition provision is in paragraph 11D of the decree. It provides that Glenwood Springs won't use the RISD as the basis for opposition to new water rights, changes of water rights, or augmentation applications that are less than 1,000 acre feet. It further provides that Glenwood Springs will not oppose implementation applications for purposes of implementation of the CRCA or the Eagle River MOU up to the amounts and yields specified in those agreements.
Okay, next up is American Whitewater, and Western Resource Advocates have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the board. Thank you to the Southern Ute Tribe for hosting us today. My name is Rob Harris. I'm here on behalf of American Whitewater and Western Resource Advocates. Western Resource Advocates is a conservation group dedicated to protecting the interior West air, land, and water. And American Whitewater and its thousands of members and affiliate members across Colorado seek to protect and enhance the existing recreational opportunities that exist here in our great state. And I'd like to reserve any leftover time I have for the city of Glenwood Springs on rebuttal. We too are in the unenviable position of disagreeing with some of the recommendations of your excellent staff. I'd like to, start focusing our conversation on, what really is before you today here, which is the three factors that you saw before you earlier. There is, so for example, what isn't before you today is the reasonableness of the recreation experience and the appropriateness of the claimed flows for that experience. Those are issues that by statute are left to the water court and will not receive any evidentiary presumptiveness in that forum. So to the extent that some of the evidence submitted by some of the opposers here goes to those issues without, bringing that broader context of maximum utilization, we would object to that evidence and urge you to disregard it. So actually going to, our position and your staff's, there's quite a bit about which that the city and staff agree upon. This staff agrees that the city is seeking less than 50% of average historical flows. Staff agrees that water pulled through the reach may be beneficially used before it leaves the state. Staff agrees that the city's proposed compact compliance provision is, quote, acceptable and appropriate, end quote. Staff agrees that the city's proposed gauge will be satisfactory for purposes of administration. Staff agrees that the event flow has an appropriate time limitation. And finally, staff agrees that the record shows that there will be an economic benefit from the proposed water right to the community of Glenwood Springs. So, one might ask, okay, well, what's the problem? Well, in its memo, staff argues that the proposed RISD would have a, quote, material impact because the flows that they are claimed are substantial. Yet, mere bigness has not in itself ever been an insurmountable obstacle to RISD appropriations in the Colorado Basin in the past. And the Wright Waters rebuttal from June 30th amply makes that point. Staff also argues that the potential impact is material because it claims that there will be 17 additional call days on the river. And, we can argue about 15 or 17 and just assuming for the sake of argument that staff's number is correct, staff doesn't explain why that additional 17 days of call on the river out of 365 days of the year renders the call contemplated here material. Staff cites the generally well-known Swazi Front Range water supply gap, and that is undeniably an important issue for this state. However, there's no explanation of how those 17 days would interfere in any way with any specific plan to meet part or all of that gap. Frankly, the connection appears to be assumed. In the absence of any specific and identifiable conflict between development of Colorado's compact allocation, we respectfully submit that the weight of the evidence before you shows that the proposed RISD is consistent with full development of Colorado's compact entitlements and will promote maximum utilization of the waters of the state. Finally, staff's July 2nd memo could be read, and I hope I'm wrong, but it could be read to suggest that any additional call day for recreational flows at this location is unacceptable. And if that's what the memo means, the board should reject that contention. The purpose of the RICD statute is to provide real, enforceable, legal protection to communities like Glenwood Springs that have an economic and quality of life interest in preserving and enhancing whitewater boating in their communities. There are those in the state who say that our prior appropriation system and the certainty and real valuable property rights it provides to senior water right holders, that system can't be reconciled with the public's interest in environmental and recreational flows. In our view, the board's decision today will help answer that question. We ask that the board make favorable findings on each of the 3 statutory factors in support of the proposed RICD, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Thanks for your comments. I actually read some of the written comments in support of the application. They have a common theme, and I wonder if you could help me address what the message was from. These are written to Jeff Hexel. Are you familiar with the written?
Not all of them, no, not the citizen comments, no.
So I'm interested in, I don't get American whitewater action alerts just because I don't live in that basin. But in reading these comments, and some of them are very thoughtful from individuals, there's a common theme, and I'm just going to share one of those with you, and then maybe you could comment. I support you to do all that is possible to maintain these flows through whatever legal action is required against these Front Range entities attempting to steal this water. So do you know what the message was from Whitewater, American Whitewater, and these action alerts? There's several here that have this theme about, please do not let late season flows diminish the water needs for the Front Range. I could go on, but that's what I saw when I read some of these comments. Are you familiar with action alerts? Or?
I know that they exist. My understanding is that one did go out. However, it is my opinion and belief that those particular statements don't necessarily represent the views of my client.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Next up, City and County of Denver.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Casey Funk. I'm the attorney with Denver Water, and I'll be presenting on behalf of Denver Water. We first started talking with Glenwood Springs about this RICD in our negotiations with the CRCA. And the negotiations were completed basically in September of 2010. And then it took about 3 years for everybody to get consent of all their clients to the CRCA. So back in 2010, when this was drafted, we had an agreement with Glenwood Springs not to oppose an RICD if the flow rate did not exceed 1250 CFS that it mimicked the historic operations of Shoshone and did not impact basically the Shoshone relaxation agreement that Denver Water had. So December of 2013, Glenwood filed their RICD application, and they claimed a flow of 2,500 CFS and 4,000 CFS. Therefore, Denver Water opposed the application. Now, there is a general theme in the cooperative agreement to cooperate. And with that in mind, notwithstanding the fact that they are asking for flows in exceeding the 1250 that we agreed not to oppose, we have been talking with Glenwood Springs to address our concerns. Now, what has come up repeatedly is, Denver, why do you care? It's a 2013 water right. Your water rights are all senior. Well, why we care is that in the same document, the CRCA, it was contemplated that we would develop a joint use project with the West Slope, and it's called the Upper Colorado Cooperative Project. Now, in my pre-hearing statement, I mistakenly referred to it as a Colorado River Cooperative Project. It could be anywhere in the, quote, Upper Colorado state, but it's most likely to occur in the Colorado River. So with that in mind, we focused in on negotiating with Glenwood Springs on how to protect that possible joint use project. And so we have been negotiating with them on a no-call agreement, and we've also been discussing on some of the other items that were addressed in the CRCA. So I'm not going to keep regurgitating my pre-hearing statement. I'm here to answer questions. And if you don't have questions, I'm going to give the rest of my time to the River District. That's part of cooperation. Can you believe I'm doing that?
Any questions? Okay,
Thanks for your presentation or short remarks. Where are you? Where are you in the application or in this joint negotiations? Are you in the middle of it? Have you made substantial progress? Do you have some?
We have made progress. We had got to a point of what I thought was an acceptable, likely settlement with Glenwood, and my client said no, try harder. So it is, so the issues that are still remaining really have to do with I would call getting the language tighter for Denver.
Are you substantive? Are you at have you made substantive progress, or are you at an impasse? Would you characterize it? How would you characterize it?
Well, we focused in on basically no call agreement protecting the Upper Colorado Cooperative Project. I think that is fair. It is patterned generally after the language that's in the decree with the River District, although there's some parts of it that my client doesn't like. For instance, should I go into this? No, I got a grimace. So I won't go into it in detail, but that is an area that we've made a lot of progress on. There's a couple other provisions that we still have some, I would call, substantial discussions to do.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Ms. Montgomery, go ahead.
Maybe I'm getting, but you're talking about this Upper Colorado Cooperative Projects. Is this one that you already have water rights for, or are you talking about some kind of a carve out for this project in addition, or you already have that?
It depends. If the Upper Colorado Cooperative Project ends up being at Wolcott, we have a water right for that, which is senior to this RICD, if that water right is sufficient for the purposes. If it is a different cooperative project, i.e. a Green Mountain pump back, we do not have a water right for that, and it would have to be junior. So it depends upon what the joint use project is negotiated. It will take approval by the Colorado River District and the county commissioners before that project is pursued, and the signatories to the CRCA will certainly weigh in and will have to be consulted on whatever that cooperative project is. So it could be senior and junior water rights. Did I use up all of River District's time?
No, I didn't count questions against you.
Oh,
So,
questions don't count?
No. Well, not for you. Because I like your first name.
Excellent first name. Is there anything else that I can help with the board's determinations? Thank you.
Okay, next up is the River District, and they have 10 minutes plus a minute and a half from Denver. So 11 and a half minutes.
Thank you, Coordinator Spall, and thank you, Colorado Water Conservation Board. My board meeting's coming up next week, so I'm getting, must be getting prepped for that. My name is Peter Fleming. I'm counsel for the Colorado River District, and I'm going to speak for a few minutes about the River District's take on this RICD proposal. I'd like to have the opportunity to bring up John Currier, our chief engineer, to talk about some of the river administration issues and the proposal that you already heard a little bit about that the River District has worked out, at least at a staff level, with the applicant. And as well, Eric Kuhn is here, and he's available to talk about compact issues, CRCA issues, and state water plan, as well as river administration issues, which he's very familiar with. These RICD hearings, always through no fault of any party or the Water Conservation Board or anybody, always have a little, the timing is always a little bit of a catch-22, because you have the water court proceeding going on, and then the hearing comes, and that goes to the water court. It always seems to be rushed. And I think at the end of our presentation, our conclusion is going to be this RICD, this process deserves a little bit more time. And maybe there's the potential, if this board is willing to defer making any findings today, to give the parties the time that it deserves to reach a conclusion with all of the objectors. The River District still is an objector in this case. We do not have board authority to settle, but we do have a direction, and based on our past discussions with the River District Board and other RICD hearings, we're confident that the concept that we've worked out with the applicant will be successful. We usually look at only two of the main three statutory criteria in RICDs. What's the impact on compact entitlement? What's the impact on maximum utilization of the state's water resources? In this case, an issue has been raised about, and we leave the fish, the in-stream flow impacts to the biologists and the CWCB. But in this case, an issue has been raised about whether the RICD might interfere with the 15-mile reach PBO and the recovery program. We don't think it will, but John Currier is available to address that issue. With respect to compact entitlement, I don't think this proceeding is going to decide how much water Colorado has left to develop. We could argue about that for the rest of the time. What we think is that whatever that number might be, we believe that Colorado's remaining compact entitlement can be developed through a combination of development upstream of the RICD, development downstream of the RICD, and development in Colorado's many other tributary basins within the Colorado River Basin. The opportunities are there, whatever that number might be of compact entitlement. We also point to the language that has been referred to by the applicant regarding exchanges during times of compact curtailment. This language has basically become de facto language in RICDs, at least within the Colorado River Basin. The River District has been part and parcel of all of those proceedings. And in fact, language that's very similar, effectively the same language, was incorporated into the CWCB's own in-stream flows in the upper Colorado River 3 in-stream flows that were appropriated in 2011. So we think that compact issues are effectively done. So as in most RACDs, the issue really comes down to maximum utilization. And when we look at it at a big new water right, whether it's an RICD or whether it's an in-stream flow or some other large scale water right, we look at what is this going to do to the small scale water user, the person that's developing a water supply for a small subdivision or an HOA or something like that on the one side, excuse me. And then what is it going to do for, what is the impact going to be on larger scale water users? A project that's going to come in with multiple collection systems, storage incorporated into the project, and so forth. We think those are two separate analyses. In this case, with respect to the small scale water user, it took us a while to get there, but we finally realized that there really is no impact on the entity that's developing a 100 acre foot HOA, a water supply and augmentation supply. They already have to augment as to the senior Shoshone water right, fully, all of their depletions. It really matters not at all whether the RICD is 1,250 CFS, 2,500 CFS, 10,000 CFS. They're already augmenting every depletion that they have. So there's no impact on these types of water users. So that leaves us with what's the impact on the large scale projects, the Eagle River MOU type projects, the Upper Colorado Cooperative type of project, or any other project that might come online, enlargement of Wolford Mountain Reservoir, for example. And we believe that there's sufficient water upstream outside of the chart that Jonathan Kelly presented, shows that there's sufficient water above the RICD to develop that. However, we're concerned about sometimes that the RICD calling out the shoulder seasons in times when it wouldn't otherwise, those types of projects wouldn't otherwise be called out. We looked on behalf of the River District, what do we need for the future in terms of offsetting new depletions in the basin? John Currier can speak about the details of this, but we figured 20,000 acre feet ought to do it. And some of that yield, what we were interested in is not necessarily protecting junior rights. We're interested in protecting new yield. Some of that new yield, as Casey Funk described, is going to be developed using senior water rights. No harm, no foul. They get, if it's a senior water right, the RICD is junior. Some of it is going to be developed using a junior water right. Sometimes that junior water right will be in priority and it'll get its anticipated yield. Sometimes it may not because of the RICD. So we took a stab at working out a deal with the applicant whereby if the anticipated yield of those future projects, the amounts that we thought were reasonable, was not going to be met because of the RICD, that the applicant would not call. And we would go through a consultation process, but the River District would make a determination, and the applicant has agreed, at least at the staff level, not to call for those projects. And I would note that that concept, we believe at the River District, can be easily scaled up to address other water rights, other projects that, for obvious Trans Mountain diverters, whether it's Eagle River MOU, Upper Colorado Cooperative Project. Casey mentioned that they're not quite there, but they're getting there on the basic same concept that the River District has. We think that can pretty easily be done. We know that the homestake partners have a lot of concerns with the RICD, but we think that if those the anticipated yield of those projects can be addressed, the reasonably anticipated yields, that we can avoid a contested trial on this matter. And that's why we're asking for maybe, either the board incorporate the concept that the River District has had and maybe build in some scalability of that, or defer its findings and give the applicant and the objectors some additional time to work things out. And if John Curry or Eric Kuhn, if I have, Madam, 3.5 minutes, great. Talk fast, John. Thank you. And we're all available to answer questions.
I'm John Currier. I'm the chief engineer for the River District. I've had 30 years of professional experience in this basin. My comments really are no different than Peter's, so it may be piling on or maybe saying something in a slightly different way than he said. First, the administrative regime. Water users above Shoshone have been called out for over 100 years. Any small user above Shoshone has to develop a replacement supply to cover their year-round depletions. For a year like 2002, there is no available water to be developed in a critically dry year. So what are we talking about? We want to develop our constituents' ability to develop in the future. So we're not talking about the small, as Peter said, the 100-acre-foot deal. We're talking about how do you develop additional replacement supplies to augment that future development. You know, we've looked back through what's gone on with the Colorado Basin Roundtable, through SWASI 2010, and through our own analysis and said, well, what kind of yield do we want to protect? Well, we want to protect the West Slope interest in the Eagle River MOU, the 10,000 acre-feet firm dry yield for the West Slope partners there. On top of that, we think there's probably another 20 or 10,000 acre-feet above and beyond existing augmentation supplies that exist in the basin that may be needed in the foreseeable future. So we said, look, I think we can develop a deal with Glenwood Springs that would allow that yield to be realized in the future. Under most conditions, the river, it's going to be realized anyway, but during critical drought periods, there may be times when future projects don't develop their yield. And in those scenarios, we want the ability to sit down with the city and with the project proponents and say, are you getting your yield that was contemplated under this reduced call provision, or are you not? If you're not, Glenwood said, well, we agree not to call. Honestly, I think that's very, very, very similar to what Denver Water wants for the Upper Colorado River Cooperative Project. And I believe in my heart, it's what the Homestake partners want for their share of Eagle River MOU, thus the scalability of the call reduction provision. I want to, as time is short, I want to cut right to what you might hear about impacting the recovery program and the ability to provide water to the 15-mile reach. Honestly, quite honestly, don't know why the Homestake partners came up with this concern. The concern is that by adding an additional water right, you will constrict the ability of reservoir operators to constrict their flexibility. I mean, from a perspective of a guy who's in on that administration on a day in, day out basis, first, the Homestake partners haven't participated in coordinated reservoir operations. It's not their reservoirs that are involved, and the other operators have the ability to recoup any storage that they've lost. And so I see absolutely no impact to the recovery program. If I did see an impact to the recovery program, we would be in this front and center because I believe it's squarely in the River District's mission and in the best interest of the state to make sure that the recovery program is successful.
Thank you.
Time's up.
Your time's up. Okay. Commissioner
Change your
Gray?
name to Casey, you can have more time.
I thought about that.
No, I do have a question, John. Do you agree with Glenwood's contention that there is only 15 days of potential additional call under this under administration of this water right?
Director McLeod, I didn't look at that specifically. I was looking at it more in the context of when does this additional call really matter? And in most years, this additional call has no influence, in my opinion, on water development upstream from the RISD. It's only when we're going into these critical drought periods that it really may be of significance.
Thank you.
Commissioner George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, a good portion of the conversation we're hearing and points being made in the materials seems to pivot around the Shoshone call, and in some degree are dependent upon the existence of that call. So my question to you is the Shoshone call permanent? Or what happens to this house of cards when the Shoshone call ability disappears?
Well, the Shoshone call in and of itself is not permanent. Under the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, there was understanding that we would do what we could to make it permanent, and we are working on that diligently, and it is a very high priority for the Colorado Basin Roundtable, as with all the CRCA signatories. We firmly believe that the Shoshone call will be permanent, and we will be doing everything in our power to make it permanent. And Eric may have some other comment related to that, but
You nailed it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Montgomery?
Thank you. I have a clarification and then a question. So the clarification is just to make sure I understand. You are working on negotiating a 20-acre-foot carve-out for upstream development, correct?
20,000.
20,000, oh, sorry.
20,000.
20,000, okay.
No
So-
call or call reduction.
And then my question is, earlier, you didn't talk about it, but someone else did. There was discussion of already an agreement of 1,000 acre, something under 1,000 or under acre foot would not be, they would not be opposed. And is that sort of how does that interact and work with this proposed 20,000 acre foot carve out?
Well, Director Montgomery, I think the no opposition provision, and possibly Glenwood could talk about that more in rebuttal, are separate and distinct. Okay. I think the no opposition provision what it envisions is that to develop future projects, some of that will occur under existing senior water rights, some will occur under existing junior or under yet to be obtained junior water rights. Some changes in water rights might occur to make that happen. And Glenwood has said, at the risk of misquoting Glenwood, look, we're not going to get in the way of the changes need or the junior water rights that need to be obtained to affect future yield. So that was.
So it's only no opposition to changes, not no opposition to any new development of 1,000 acre feet. Maybe that's what I need clarification on.
Well, Director Montgomery, I'm not sure there's any difference, but maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
Okay. Casey, do you want them to answer or?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to have a clarification on the 1,000 acre.
I believe this is the same point that Director McLeod asked about a minute ago. The non-opposition provision is separate and distinct from the call reduction provision.
Yeah.
The non-opposition provision is a offer by Glenwood Springs essentially to not use the RICD as a basis for getting into water court and opposing future applications for new water rights, changes of water rights, or augmentation plans in basin of less than 1,000, it actually doesn't say in basin, but less than 1,000 acre feet. And in addition, that the Glenwood Springs won't use this water right as the basis to oppose additional cases related to implementation of the CRCA or the Eagle River MOU.
Okay, so now I can go back to my question, how they're connected. So if they were to do that 20 times 1,000 acre feet, that's 20,000 acre feet of development that's occurring. How does that count towards the 20,000 acre feet carve out?
No, I wouldn't see the no opposition in any way counting towards the 20,000 acre foot carve out, as it were. There may be applications that don't contribute significantly to yield, and Glenwood's not going to be in those cases. There may be some that do, and Glenwood's in those cases, but in and of themselves, that doesn't mean they contribute to that yield. What we're going to be looking at in that yield is the yield actually being developed, and can we tally up the development of that carve-out yield over the course of many, many years, because it will take, honestly, many, many years to get there. So I think the issues are really separate and distinct. Thank you. Unless there's more questions. Director Gallagher.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the River District for your testimony. After reading the volumes of material associated with this from both objectors and applicant, my concern really revolved around that any call greater than the Shoshone call would negatively affect the flexibility of upstream operations in the Colorado River Basin and reduce the effectiveness or even close out water management options at a time when we recognize that we will need more flexibility in the system in order to meet downstream compact obligations while also implementing Colorado River Basin IPPs or even the CRCA provisions. And I'm hearing that there isn't so much a concern about flexibility of operations. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, let me answer. Eric Kuhn with the Colorado River District. I think that's true. I think this, with what we've heard from Glenwood Springs, that flexibility will be there. And I'm struck by, in answering your question, Ted Kowalski said this is about optics. And my concern is there's the optics on both sides of this. Glenwood Springs is a CRCA participant. They're a signatory. This is one of those important things that they get out of this. Communities up and down the river on the west slope are looking at this and with that optics as well. But we think that with the kind of provisions that the district has put in place and the fact that this is in the shadow of the Grand County RISD, when you look at it, step back and for a big picture, this advances the CRCA Eagle River MOU. It doesn't detract from that.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you. Casey?
Okay. Yes?
I had a question.
Oh, do you have a question?
My question's actually for Eric. And it's not part of our findings today, but since we're on board time, I know how many, including the River District, Denver Water, and many other water users, including CWCB, are looking to the future on trying to avoid a curtailment, which is covered. Right. And we're looking at how to reduce the deficit. Having this water right in the central section of the Colorado River, do you see it impacting other arrangements kind of along some of the discussion that on flexibility of operations and water banking or other things that we come up with as a state and water users throughout the state that depend on the Colorado River?
My answer to that is maybe, but I think what we're trying to do in the negotiations with Glenwood Springs and with the provisions that the state has asked for, we're trying to provide for that flexibility in the future. And I think we're there. We're getting there. Again, go back to what Peter said. I think we may need some additional time, but everything I've heard indicates that we're moving in the direction of having that in this decree.
But we're not there today.
Based on what I heard from Casey Funk, I don't think we're there today.
Thank you.
Next up is the City of Aurora, City of Colorado Springs, and Homestake Partners have 45 minutes.
Are we just gonna, okay, they're gonna stay there. All right, I'll start this out. Good morning, my name is Joe Stibrich. I'm the Water Resources Policy Manager for Aurora Water. With me today is Gret Bracely, who's the Water Resources Manager from Colorado Springs Utilities, and we're here to represent our cities and the Homestake project. With us is Aaron Wilson and Tyler Benton of Wilson Water Group and Darren Shepard of SG1 Water Consulting Limited, who are here as technical experts to present our positions on the issues we have disputed in this RICD claim. Our issues are the following. We do not oppose reasonable RICIDs, but we believe this RICID claim is extraordinary by any measure. The map, which you can see over here, depicts the drainage area affected by this claim. The Glenwood RICID will control future water development in 46% of the Colorado River watershed shown. And with the Carbondale RICID on the Roaring Fork, 56% of the watershed will be controlled. We believe that the volume of water claimed over 581,000 acre feet will seriously impair full development of Colorado's compact entitlement. This claim will severely impact the state of Colorado's ability to meet its future water needs, reallocate usable water to areas of the state with limited future needs, make water unavailable to meet other needs in Colorado. And as Mr. Hamilton pointed out, compact development can occur in other basins, and this RICID is going to shift the burden of water supply development to meet the future needs of the state to the Yampa, to the Gunnison, and to the Rio Grande basins, while promoting further dry up of our irrigated lands throughout the state. Our cities are, of course, interested in protecting our existing absolute and conditional rights. But this RICID can foreclose future options for meeting water supply needs for ourselves, but also due to the extraordinary scope of this claim, it must be considered in the context of water availability for the state as a whole. If granted, it will profoundly affect the options available to Colorado as it tries to balance the many competing issues in meeting the water needs of a growing population while protecting the natural environment we all value and cherish in Colorado. This RICID claim need not and should not have such a profound effect. This board is the entity that understands the difficult water supply issues facing the state and should not allow the state's future water supply options to be taken away by such RICID claims. This extraordinary RICID is not needed to protect and promote recreation in the Glenwood Springs area. There has been and can continue to be a robust water-based recreation economy at lower flows. As we will demonstrate, the claim is not the minimum amount needed for a reasonable recreational experience, and in fact, higher stream flows do not relate to increased recreational use. Furthermore, the current design is incomplete and does not represent the most efficient use of the state's water to meet the claim beneficial use. Our recommendations are as follows. We support the CWCB staff's proposed finding and recommendation that the board find that this application does not meet the statutory requirements of the CWCB rules for an RICD. We further recommend that CWCB develop technical guidelines for future RICID claims that defines the information needed to define a reasonable recreational experience, including the costs and benefits associated with the RICID, demonstrates that the proposed flow claim and RICID design represents the most efficient means to apply the minimum amount of water necessary to achieve the claim beneficial use, demonstrates that such reasonable recreational experience can actually be achieved, and defines the engineering criteria and level of analysis and design needed to properly evaluate a proposed RICID. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron Wilson.
I'm Erin Wilson with Wilson Water Group. I'm challenged. Our presentation is going to summarize our analysis, which shows that the Glenwood RICD materially impairs the full development of Colorado's compact entitlements, that the volume of the Glenwood RICD claim exceeds 50% of available flow, and that the RICD does not promote maximum utilization of water. I'm not going to go as far into these slides because of time, but basically every published document shows that there is water available for Colorado to develop under their entitlement. And at the low end, we see numbers as least 0.4 million acre feet. I'm challenged. So we know we have water to develop under our entitlement, and we definitely know we have demand. This pie chart shows the potential demand through 2060 for Colorado River water in Colorado. It's based primarily on SWASI 2010 numbers, which only projected demand through 2050. In the Colorado River Supply and Demand Study, CWCB staff and Colorado water users that were involved in that study extended those 2050 demands through 2060. Also took a stab at trying to determine what portion of the South Platte and Arkansas demands needed to come from another source from the Colorado River Basin. The dark blue of this pie chart shows demands, I actually have a pointer, shows demands that are not directly impaired by the RICD. They're demands in the Colorado River Basin and its tributaries downstream of the RICD, and their demands in the other Colorado basins, the Yampa, the White, the Gunnison, the San Juan, and the Dolores. The light blue part of the pie chart shows demands that may very well be impaired by a Glenwood RICD. There are demands upstream on the Colorado River and the demands that will need to be met likely from a Colorado source for South Platte and Arkansas uses. And as you can see, the light blue is over 60% of the demands that we feel will likely be met from the Colorado River or could potentially be met from the Colorado River. This slice down here that's pulled out is the Colorado River above the RIC demand in basin demand. That demand is right around 20,000 acre feet according to SWASI, which is right in line with the 20,000 acre foot carve out, as you call it, the supply protection that's been proposed by the applicant. Part of the reason why location is important of the RICD is because it does reduce the duration of free river days. In fact, our analysis shows it reduces the duration up to 59 days. This table just shows us a part of our analysis period from 2004 to 2013. Some years, 2008, 2011, good flow years, there's no additional call days beyond what's already called from Shoshone and Cameo. So some days it doesn't matter. 2004, we see there's 59 additional days. Now the applicant determined much fewer days than we have, and partly because they assumed there was always 1250 being called down through Shoshone. We use actual historic call records that show that that's not always the case. And here's just a quick example of how we do a call analysis. This shows on the y-axis flow in CFS, and the x-axis is the RID, the requested RID season from April 1st through September 30th. The blue line, the solid blue line, is actual flow in the river through the RICD section in 2004. The black line is the submarine, I think they called it the submarine. That is the proposed RICD flow claim. Now the gray area shaded is where we already in 2004 had a historical call. So either Shoshone or Cameo was calling water through. So we wouldn't have had any future development anyway. The white is free river days then, and it would continue to be free river days because the flow is greater than the proposed RICD claim. The red is what's really important here. Those are additional days of call due to the RICD. And in this case, in 2004, it was an additional 59 days during that period. So in summary, the larger demands are upstream of the RICD. The potential future demand from that pie chart is almost 250,000 acre feet. That includes, again, demand in the Colorado River above the RICD claim and demands that could potentially come from the South Platte and the Arkansas. The future downstream demand is only 150,000 acre feet. And that, again, includes water on the main stem of the Colorado and its tributaries and all the other basins, the San Juan, the Yampa, the Gunnison. I want to note here about the water energy development. The applicant used the water energy needs assessment phase 1 information that listed all the conditional rights for energy needs. and the conditional rights are very large. The CWCB Phase 3 water needs assessment actually looked at what is the need for water to meet our energy reserves. So they didn't just use the conditional rights, and they came up with a medium level of 88,000 acre feet in the entire western slope. That 88,000 acre feet was adopted in SWASI 2010. That 88,000 acre feet is included in that 150,000 acre feet. So all energy demands are already included in here. And finally, we believe the RCD will limit upstream water use and impair the ability for Colorado to develop their full entitlement by decreasing the number of free river days. And as was mentioned before by the applicant, if unmet future demands can't be met in the Colorado River, certainly they will be met from somewhere else, potentially the Yampa, the Gunnison, the Rio Grande, or significant dry up of irrigated acreage in our state. Next, I want to show how our analysis indicates that the applicant is asking for more than 50% of the flow in the river. First, we're not comfortable with the applicant's study period. We think it's not representative of current administration. And these are just 3 examples of things that have changed between 1984 and 2013 that have significantly changed the flow regime in the river. First, Orchard Mesa check case in 1996. It changed Green Mountain Reservoir operation and reduced the cameo call from 2260 to 1950 CFS. Wolford Mountain was built and started filling in 1995. And we'll show Shoshone power plant operations have significantly changed over time. Also, when they looked at their hydrology, they did not remove upstream releases from reservoirs. In some years, there's 100,000 acre feet that flows to that reach from releases from upstream reservoirs. Much of that is voluntary flow releases for the fish program. And we believe that a more appropriate analysis would disclude that voluntary releases in determining what the available flow is. This is just one example of how the flow regime has changed. These are historic diversion records, daily diversion records through Shoshone for the applicant's period from 1984 to 2013. It's, again, diversions in CFS is the y-axis. And as you can see, between about 1984 and about 2003, 2004, Shoshone operations were very consistent. After that period of time, Shoshone is not operating as it has historically. And even after the turbines were replaced in 2008, it's clear that the operations of Shoshone are not the same as they were in the early study period the applicant used. We also have a little bit of a concern about the gauge that they used. So the applicant chose to use the .0 gauge, which is 18 miles upstream of the RICD reaches. And they estimated the incremental gain from ungauged tributaries between .0 and their reaches. We chose in our analysis to use 2 gauges that are literally within a half a mile of the lower RICD reach. The Colorado River below Colorado Springs gauge and the Roaring Fork gauge. And simply you take the Colorado River at Colorado Springs gauge, subtract the Roaring Fork, and that's what flow is in the river right here at this reach. And it makes a difference in the analysis. This table here on the right-hand side shows we use the same period for both. Their .0 gauge was 7.9% estimated flow, and our gauge using the 2 nearest gauges approach. And as you can see, our analysis shows that 50% of the flow is 552,000 acre feet, and the applicant is claiming 581,000 acre feet, which is above 50% of the gauge. And this is even before we take out any upstream reservoir releases, which obviously would make it worse. And I kind of want to put this in perspective a little bit. This aerial photo is about 2 miles wide. So you would have to put 9 of these aerial photos together to get to the .0 gauge instead of simply using the gauges that are sitting right there. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tyler Benton to talk about our analysis showing that that the RICD does not promote the maximum use of water.
My name is Tyler Benton. I'm with Wilson Water Group, and I'll be talking about how the proposed RICD does not promote maximum utilization of water. We'll begin, as the next slide shows, by discussing how the RICD will restrict future river operations, including the ability to operate exchanges and how it can affect the endangered fish recovery program. 88% of the main stem reservoir storage is located upstream of the proposed RICD. And to the extent in the future it's necessary to move water from the lower reaches of the river to these upstream reservoirs, the RICD will restrict that ability to operate exchanges. In regard to the Endangered Fish Recovery Program, we believe that the RICD will or can affect the program in relation to the coordinated reservoir release, the coordinated reservoir operations, or CROSS. In many years, reservoir operators voluntarily bypass storable inflow during the peak of the hydrograph. These bypasses increase flow through the 15-mile reach for the endangered fish. The reservoir operators then fill later in the season, either under a junior water right or under free river conditions. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, the RICD will reduce the number of free river days and could potentially discourage these reservoir operators from participating in the voluntary program. I'd next like to talk a little bit about the historical commercial float boating industry in Glenwood Springs. Glenwood has a robust recreational economy, and we'll show some of this data. It's collected by the U.S. Forest Service on an annual basis, and we will, I'll direct your attention to this slide. This slide summarizes the available data from the year 2000 through 2012. On the left vertical axis, we have user days, and that's shown in the red bar chart here. On the right horizontal axis, we have average stream flow, and that's shown on the blue solid line here. On the horizontal axis, we have, it's a little confusing, but essentially each vertical line represents a Saturday during the given months, and that way we can compare weekends from year to year. But a couple takeaways from this figure, we see that use typically increases during the month of June, reaching peak levels in July through mid-August before use declines pretty steeply. Now this use we see this in every year that we studied from 2000 through 2012, and it peaks during the time when families are on vacation visiting Glenwood Springs. And no matter which year we look at, which type, no matter the hydrology, we see that most of the use occurs during this time frame. I'll make a quick note of the use in April, where during the study period, there's very limited use historically. I'd now like to show a couple of year type examples. We'll start with the wet year 2011. And this year, as you may recall, it was a very wet year. In fact, we show stream flow off of the graph here. Just a quick note, we do have the axes set the same for all of our figures for easy comparison, but the stream flow is greater than the 7,000 CFS shown. In fact, it peaks at over 17,000 CFS in this year. During these high flows, we note that the use is suppressed, and use doesn't begin to increase until after the hydrograph starts to recede. Peak use in this year doesn't occur until late July, and it extends through the middle of August. I'll draw your attention to the 4th of July holiday in this year, where we had about 300 users per day on the river. And now we'll compare that to the dry year of 2012. In this year, stream flow was only 43% of average. You see that there was no substantial snowmelt runoff, and flows were pretty even throughout the boating season. However, when we look at use, we see that use increases sharply during the month of June, reaching peak levels in July and continuing those through mid-August. If we compare the 4th of July holiday use for this drier year during lower flows, we see that about 900 users were on the river in this year, which is 3 times the amount of use that occurred the prior year. In summary, the commercial float boating data shows that boating is primarily influenced by time of year. We see peak use occurring July through mid-August, which coincides with the time that families are on vacation. When we look at the relationship between float boating and stream flow, we see that there's not a relationship showing increased flows result in increased use. However, in our example year 2011, we see that in these high flow years, use is suppressed. When we compare total use between 2012 and 2011, we see that there's about 26% more use on the river. I'd now like to talk about the efficiency of the RICD claim, and this figure kind of helps to illustrate that. On the left, we have given flow rates ranging from 1,000 CFS to 2,500 CFS. On the right, we have the number of days that those flow rates are equaled or exceed. Now, if it's the applicant's goal to provide a recreational experience of about 2,000 CFS, then you could expect on average about 84 days out of the boating season to achieve that. However, if you had a goal of providing a recreational experience at 1,200 CFS, you could achieve provide an experience about 167 days out of the boating season. You'd effectively double your duration of that experience. In summary, our analysis shows that the RICD materially impairs full development and use of the Colorado River Compact entitlements. Our analysis shows that the volume of our RICD claim exceeds 50% of available flow, and the RICD does not promote maximum utilization of water. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to turn it over to Darren Shepard.
Thank you, Tyler. And good morning, and thank you for hearing my summary of testimony. Ms. Chappelle, may I ask that you let me know when I'm down to about 3 minutes or so?
Down to 3?
About 3 minutes or so.
Yeah, you have 24 right now.
Great, thank you. So my name is Darren Shepard, One Water Consulting out of Edmonton, Canada. And I am a hydraulic expert with 20 years of experience as a water resources engineer, in addition to 10 years of experience in designing and developing whitewater parks. I stand here in a unique position, I believe, in being able to talk to you about the technical aspects of RICD development, and hope to share my knowledge and findings with you to assist in your decision-making. My presentation will talk about how S2O's work is an incomplete conceptual design and has not been advanced to a sufficient level for it to be brought before the board today. Reason being, there is a gross lack of field data that has been collected, and that field data stands as the foundation for the work upon which you do your hydraulic design and also your engineering analyses using various design aid tools that are available to us as water resources engineers. By not having this foundation, it means that the analyses that are conducted end up being inaccurate and very unreliable. And for that reason, any of the minimum flows that are claimed or cited by the city of Glenwood Springs are also inaccurate and unreliable. It's my opinion that with adequate information for these RICDs, they can be designed to provide a reasonable recreational experience at a much lower claimed river discharge. I want to speak briefly about the key phases of a whitewater park project, RICD. The two are interchangeable. The first 3 phases are what I consider need to be completed before you make an application for a RICD. Project feasibility, conceptual design, and preliminary engineering. And we've all seen that Mr. Shipley has provided a preliminary engineering design report. The other items, 4 through 7, are not applicable or relevant today, so I won't talk about them. The reason why I believe that S2O's work is an incomplete conceptual design is because, as I said, it lacks that field data. There's been no real hydraulic analysis performed to date. And in addition to that lack of hydraulic analysis, it's an incomplete hydraulic design. I'll actually start with the 4th point because I kind of want to go through it systematically. And it starts out with site selection. And the concern I have with no name specifically is I think that it's inappropriately cited in terms of where the 2 RICD structures are. With regard to Horseshoe Bend, it's a very remote site, and that has issues with regard to functionality and safety. The first point up here, speaks to a lack of adequate design, as I've mentioned. This lack of design is not only with regard to placement of the structures on the river, but also their geometries and just their overall how they fit each site. Each of these sites, and I call them 6 sites, or 6 RISDs, are unique. They have unique channel geometry, and these structures that are going to be put into the river need to fit the river appropriately. The second point is that Mr. Shipley uses the broad-crested weir equation. And although I would agree that it is acceptable to use it at a feasibility or at the beginning of a conceptual design phase, it's not something that should be brought to the table now as part of preliminary engineering. I'm currently conducting a whitewater park project right now, and I'm nearing the end of preliminary engineering. And what I would be able to bring to you is not only a detailed design that provides you with dimensions, elevations, slopes, and all the details with regard to the main channel feature and the bypass channels, but you would have photographs and video footage from physical modeling, from numerical modeling, showing you exactly what these wave features and characteristics look like, so that you're not sitting here wondering, what does it look like? Because no one has seen what type of wave we're creating here. So how do we know if it's creating a reasonable recreational experience or not? The third point speaks to the insufficient analysis for all the RISDs with regard to flood levels. Flooding is important. And if these structures are put in the river and they cause higher water levels, that is a problem. Scour, deposition, and sediment transport, these are things that I would refer to as geomorphology, how the riverbed changes and how the channel changes on account of putting these structures in. And lastly, how will fish pass upstream? I know that there's a dam upstream, but passing these structures is important, and they will also have an impact on fish habitat. The following provides examples of the information, the level of information that has been provided to all of us with regard to the Glenwood RISD. The bottom left colorful image is the only section view, or the view looking at the side of the RISD structure. It's hypothetical, it's generic, it's the kind of thing that would apply to practically any RISD throughout the country. What's missing from this is that we don't know what the elevation is at the crest of the drop or the exit, and more importantly, what that slope is. The slope very much drives the shape of the wave and the wave characteristics. We don't know that. Nowhere within the reports or the drawings has S2O mentioned what the slope of these structures are, whether they're all the same, be it 8-to-1 slope or 10-to-1, or they're varied to give you that different experiences at the same river discharge. The image on the right is an excerpt from the original preliminary engineering report, and it speaks about the bypass. And the concern I have with this is that although it is a U-shaped structure that spans the river, the bypass is really an afterthought. There has been what looks to be very much like a bridge pier dividing the main channel from the bypass. But he hasn't, Mr. Shipley has not actually looked at how the shape of the main channel needs to be changed and the bypass in order to incorporate that. We're only at a point now where we have seen the main channel and the bypass separated as part of their rebuttal report, and I'll speak to that in a moment. This slide is just more information. Top right corner is a plan view of a U-shaped structure. It's irrelevant. There's no bypass, so it's applicable to anything, something else. Bottom left, same thing. It's as if you're standing in the river looking upstream at a structure that is comprised of a low flow, high flows. It's educational, but only at a real feasibility level. It's the kind of thing that what I would present to my client who wants to have a whitewater park, but they really don't know what they're getting into. So it's rather elementary. This is the slide that talks about the bypass channel and how it's been incorporated. So finally, at the rebuttal stage, we see what the structure looks like. The two plots are the same. They're cross-sectional plots of two rivers, RISD number 1, the upstream of the two. The bottom one does not have a distorted scale, so the horizontal scale and the vertical scale is 1-to-1. But what I want to point out is you can see in the upper image that's more colorful is that the slopes of the main channel, they're appropriate. But as you get into this bypass channel, those slopes are very steep. There's a 1.5-foot horizontal to 1-foot drop. And when you don't have much water going through that bypass and you have the structure and the grouted boulders are wet, that to me is a bit of an issue in terms of safety. The other issue here is that I believe it's not clear in the rebuttal report, but I presume that what's shown below is for Two Rivers number 1. Now, what Mr. Shipley has done here is he's shown the main channel and the bypass superimposed over the existing geometry. If you were to go back to the survey data points that were collected at Two Rivers, you would find that over that 115 to 120 foot width of channel, there are 4 data points that tell you what the bed level is through there. So what is it like over those large gaps? Does it change quite a bit? And that's significant. So we're dealing with very insufficient information upon which he's trying to set these structures. As I mentioned, I have concerns with the bypass channel geometry, but I also have concerns with the locations of the bypasses. Bypasses are required for safety reasons. Those people who are currently coming down the river or choose to come down the river once the structure's in place and do not want to navigate the main channel, which is going to be a hydraulic feature, should be able to get to that bypass channel. It shouldn't be difficult. You should be able to basically approach it and get to it without issue. This is No Name site, and as for those assume we're all familiar with this, know that No Name is on a bend on the river. What will happen is people come around the bend of that river. They will tend to be out here where the velocity, the speed of the river is faster and it's deeper. And one of the slides that was in Glenwood's presentation shows rafters coming downstream, and they're on that right side of the river looking downstream. The bypass is on the other side. So what that means is someone coming downstream would have to paddle hard to get to the other side. It just doesn't make sense. The other thing here is that we have the parking lot and the regional pathway along this side of the river. So if someone were to go through the bypass, they're not a good boater, they fall out of their boat goes downstream, they're not stranded if you put it on the other side of the river. Similar issue here at Horseshoe Bend. Horseshoe Bend, you've got the bypasses on the wrong side of the river. Had they been on the other side, people would have access to the regional pathway. The bank slopes are steep as well through here. Two Rivers has the same issues. We don't have steep canyon walls here like we do at Horseshoe Bend, but what we do have along this bank where the bypasses are located is very mature trees that extend right down to the river's edge. This means that anyone coming out of their boats looking to seek refuge, egress on that side of the river, it's very inhospitable. It doesn't make sense. The other side, you have a regional pathway and you have Two Rivers Park. So again, if people dump out of their boats and their boats go downstream, they're not left stranded on this side of the river and have to pass over the railroad tracks. The other issue that I have with the siting of the bypass channels here is that if someone were to fall out of their boat downstream of Rissid number 2, and they don't make it to that small little spit of land right here, the flow from the Roaring Fork River is going to push them further into the middle of the channel. So they really have no choice but to swim all the way across the river to the other side. So to me, I think this is kind of a gross oversight, and this has not been disputed in the rebuttal report at all. Mr. Shipley has talked quite a bit about both the broad-crested weir equation and the freestyle surface index. The broad-crested weir equation is used to determine discharge by relating the bottom or the width of the weir or the channel and the flow depth. It's not exactly flow depth, it's referred to as total head, but more or less it's the same thing. This is an example for Two Rivers with the geometry of the main channel shown on here, and then the tabular information that came up or was used to come up with these values. Now, this is as part of the rebuttal and where the main channel has been separated from the bypass. And so the value shown here is not 500 for base flow because 400 is going to the main and assume that 100 is going to the bypass. If you look at the apportionment between the bypass and the main channel here for Two Rivers, you're looking at an 80%, 20% split all the way through. And to me, that doesn't make sense. And if you actually were to do two-dimensional numerical modeling, you would get a true flow split. Just because you've assumed or given 80% of your flow area for your main channel and 20% for your bypass, doesn't mean that you're going to get 80% of the discharge going this way and 20% of it going that way. A lot of it depends, especially with No Name, with flow coming around the bend, that bypass is going to take more flow and take some away from your main channel. So these are the types of things that need to be assessed. But what I want to point out here is that there's no criterion that's been set as to what is your minimum depth necessary for navigation and for safety. But what Mr. Shipley has shown is that depths of about 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 have been used as kind of a minimum. So what I've shown here in red is if I were to use 1.5 feet as my minimum for each of these steps going up, you can see how in red over here, how these discharges change. For the base flow, it goes from 400 CFS down to 220, almost a 50% reduction. And those reductions are seen as you step from the base flow all the way up into the high flow. The other issue with the use of this broad-crested weir equation is it shows reverse engineering. His value of flow depth has been tweaked to give him exactly 400 CFS. The other case, it's 1,000 CFS. You shouldn't be working it this way. You should be coming up with suitable flow depths that make sense for each of the different RICD sites, and then you get discharges. You would get different discharges for all 6 of these RICIDs, and then presumably the larger one would end up governing. Further, with regard to the weir equation, it's supposed to be used if you have a uniform velocity distribution across your channel. This image on the right is 2-dimensional numerical modeling that's been conducted by my firm, and it's not imaginary. It's probably more real than anything we've seen in terms of the hydraulics of this river. It's no name. The red illustrates where the high velocity is. There's a high velocity in the middle of the channel. The cross-section to the left here is cut at the RICID site number 1, and you can see with the red line, that's not uniform. Along the banks, you've got velocities of around 3 feet per second. Through the middle, they're more like 7 and 8 feet. So again, misuse of the equation. S2O contends that the FSI is a valid and accepted method that is used not only to compare recreational experiences between existing and decreed structures, but also to identify minimum flows. And as a whitewater design engineer, I can assure you that this is not a generally accepted among my peers as a metric that should be used in that manner. Mr. Shipley referred to the power index. The power index was brought in, I believe, by the CWCB in 2003. Power index was brought in so that one could see if a stream had enough power for the development of a whitewater park. That was it. So from there, we've gone to the surface index, where all it's really done is introduce the width. It really hasn't changed much. Mr. Shipley has come up with this FSI, which is no different than the surface power index, except it's divided by 1,000. There's no difference there at all. And the FSI, because it's derived from the power index, and the power index was never used to actually come up with quantitative values, I don't think that his value should be used in that way. And in fact, it's my opinion that FSI should not be used from this point forward for any RICID cases. Instead, FSI alone, without the hydraulic analyses that are done, numerical modeling, physical modeling, it's just not sufficient to determine minimum flow. It's a helpful metric, but it's not giving you your answer. It's not telling you that you need 400 or 2,500 CFS or 4,000 CFS. Within S2O's rebuttal report, by his own admission, Mr. Shipley states that the design of the U structure can be manipulated to change the shape and energy state of the hydraulic jump to create desirable recreational experiences. What this means to me is that you start off with something, and maybe your discharge value is quite high, or your flows it's not giving you the hydraulic performance you need, and you manipulate and you change your shape and you narrow things up and you deepen things. And none of this has been done. The due diligence isn't there in support of using FSI and any of the equations that he's using, which are rather rudimentary. So with better data and further engineering analysis, it's my opinion, and based on the calculations I have, given the data I have available to me, I think these RICID values can be reduced anywhere between 20 to 35%. This table here shows what it would look like if the RICID flow rates were reduced by approximately 35%. It would mean that the low flow claim of 1250 CFS would be reduced to 800. It would mean that the 2500 mid flow claim could be reduced to 1,600, and it means that the high flow claim of 4,000 can come all the way down to about 2,600 CFS. Now these are values that are approximate, and I say they're approximate because I'm basing them on insufficient data. And not until we have that sufficient data will we really know what these values are. Other things of importance are flood impacts. Mr. Shipley has claimed that the proposed RISDs meet all regulatory floodplain requirements and that there will be no net rise in water levels. Yet there's no basis for this. He's spoken of some 1D modeling that may have been conducted, may or may not have been conducted. I have conducted 1D modeling of this site for the existing conditions, natural conditions, and compared it by putting in structures at no name. What I found is that up to a 1 foot rise in water level occurs at the 100-year flood design discharge or flood discharge of 32,500 CFS. Now, my assumption at that time was based on a structure that did not include the bypass. It was just this full spanning width structure, terrace structure. If you were to put a divide island in there, and now you're going to separate the flow and add more friction to this channel, I can guarantee you that 12 inches becomes something greater. The other things are with regard to geomorphology. S2O's report failed to adequately discuss and address sedimentation. Now they talk about scour. Scour causes holes in the river. And when that material gets removed from those holes, it becomes deposited somewhere else. So sedimentation is of equal importance to scour. And also there's sediment transport. These structures, by definition, in some other RISD cases or cases that aren't referred to as RISDs, they're referred to as grade stabilization structures. They tend to hold sediment that would normally move through the river, along the riverbed, upstream of these structures and starve the river downstream. So an aggradation upstream and a degradation downstream. This has environmental and morphological impacts on the existing river system. In addition to the fact that these structures, there is often required a significant amount of infilling of material between the two so that your bed elevations are what they need to be for hydraulic performance. Site access, I mentioned this at the beginning. Horseshoe Bend, beautiful, scenic, but it's remote. If someone gets hurt there, emergency aid, it will take them a long time to get to that site. And the other thing is when you're boating down there and you need to get back, you know, you're basically hiking your boat on your shoulder and walking 0.7 miles back upstream to the limited parking lot. I would also question the ability for this site to be able to host competitions because of its remoteness, and question whether or not it should even apply to that 4,000 CFS of the high flow claim should even apply to this location. Now this slide I think is probably one of the more important slides here, and it's based on no name information from no name. I think through this reach I have sufficient information, and I've taken a profile through the reach. It's about 1,000 feet. I've taken the structures and I placed them, to the best of my knowledge, looking at plan views where they would be in the river. First thing to point out, it's kind of hard to see here, but the water surface profile, we measured it, our team, on 2 different dates, discharge of 2,300 CFS and 5,000 CFS. The water surface that you see down here, it won't change on account of putting these structures in. The hydraulic control is downstream. And what this means though, is that this first structure, I'll start with the first structure, you can see the blue line represents horizontal. They want to take advantage of the hydraulic drop through here. The drop's already happened before you get to the first structure. This structure is not properly sited. Now with regard to the second structure, and the way I've placed this, which is standard for whitewater park structure placement, is that the exit of the upstream structure is the same as the entrance or the crest of the downstream one. This downstream structure, you can see these step-ups all the way through. Even at the highest wing, everything is underwater. The thing is completely submerged. It's not going to give you a hydraulic. You're not even going to see the thing under most conditions. It's a total oversight, and it just shows that there's a lack of assessment that's been done. Looking at it in cross-section, I'll focus more on RISD number 2. Here is what S2O is proposing. This is the actual existing geometry of that reach. They're saying that the structure, what it tells me is that the river would have to be widened significantly in order to accommodate this. This is some 3D renderings. The yellow shows how much of the channel would need to be excavated in order to accommodate these structures. On the right, what I would do here is I would start to change things. I wouldn't get into my hydraulic analyses just yet. There's a lot of critical information missing. Detailed surveys, water surface profiles, field observations, physical modeling. Mr. Shipley talks about physical modeling costing over $600,000. I've been conducting physical model studies for over 15 years. I've conducted 150 studies. I can tell you that estimate is grossly overestimated, and the value of physical modeling is completely invaluable as a design aid tool. This is an example of a survey on a river, not this one in Canada, where sufficient data points were collected along the river. It's very methodical, it's systematic in its collection. This is 2 rivers. No data was collected up the Roaring Fork. Huge gaps in data. If you were to look right here at RISD number 2, as I said, you got 1, 2, 3 points of data, maybe 4. They're just telling you what that channel cross-section is. It's insufficient. Same thing here, Horseshoe Bend. The only site where we have some decent information is at No Name, except we're missing a lot of information right here along RISD number 1. And in fact, I determined that the survey should have extended further downstream for the purposes of physical and numerical modeling. So in conclusion, as I've said, I think we've got a lack of information. It's not possible for us to review and assess these sites. And because of that, any of the values that have been provided to you in terms of minimum flows, they're inaccurate, they're unreliable, and they're highly questionable. And it's my opinion, with better data and further engineering analyses, the flow claims could be lowered on the order of about 20 to 35% and still provide the claimed recreational experience. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 1 second left.
Wow.
Very good. So an executive decision has been made that we're going to get through all the testimony and then ask the board to go and get their lunch and deliberate during lunch while we come back here, because we're about an hour behind. So that's the plan. Next up is Colorado Parks and Wildlife, 5 minutes.
What's that? Oh, okay. Yes, for the record, Jay Skinner for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. CPW has a dual mission, as you all know, both fish and wildlife and recreation. We have to preserve and protect fish and wildlife and habitat, and we generally support all forms of recreation, including, whitewater recreation, not just at state parks, but elsewhere as well. To date, we've had a lot of very productive conversations with the city of Glenwood Springs and their consultant team. There's no reason to believe that these conversations won't continue as this project moves forward. Our pre-hearing statement identified a number of concerns relating to permitting, design, and construction, and post-construction activities. We also identified an issue that's probably remote in nature, but not outside the realm of possibility as it relates to the event flow, the short duration, high flow, and the possibility, at least as a contingency, that the applicant may secure a reservoir run or reservoir release to meet that event flow, just for planning purposes. There is a proposed term in the decree that the applicant talked about earlier today that largely takes care of many of those permitting issues, as well as the reservoir run for the event flow. Basically, engaging with Parks and Wildlife early, before the 404 permit application is filed, to address issues before the Corps of Engineers are engaged in the process as well. There are a number of environmental impacts relating to any construction activity that happens in rivers. Whitewater parks are certainly no exception, and in fact, they have some rather unique impacts in that the hydraulics of these structures create water depths and water velocities that have an impact on fish passage. We do have the added benefit of the bypass channel that we're hopeful that design aspect will address some of those fish passage issues, and that we'll have lower velocities and depths that are more conducive to fish passage, particularly smaller fish at the flows contemplated. Scour and deposition in and around these structures impacts fish habitat and macroinvertebrate as macroinvertebrate impacts. With all of that said, I guess we're hopeful that many of these issues can be dealt with by the pre-permitting consultations that are identified in the water court decree paragraph that is specific to those concerns. So the only remaining issues relate to site selection. Our pre-hearing statement, we went through a fair amount of detail, and we totally understand the need in the water court process to have flexibility, and that is really the need for the 3 possible sites being identified and moving forward at this juncture. But we do have preferences with respect to site. We like the Two Rivers site. We think it's the best from a number of perspectives. It's kind of the most urban site. There's a lot of existing activity around that site. There's an existing boat ramp there. There's parking, and from a community standpoint, I think that if you were having whitewater events, folks could go up and grab some lunch and come back down and have a picnic and be able to watch these events. The no-name site kind of fits second in our mind. It has some of those same aspects in terms of access, and certainly in terms of where am I at?
Time's up.
Time's up. Let me go ahead and summarize. So lastly, our experience with these whitewater parks is they have a tendency to grow. Therefore, to the degree that's possible, we'd like the board to recommend to the water court that once one site is selected for construction, that the other 2 sort of go away, that we don't have several of these sites developed, and the conceptual drawings talk about 2 structures, and we'd like to see them limited to the 2 structures at the site selected.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up will be the presentation by the CWCB staff, and they have 15 minutes.
Good morning. Almost noon. I'm Suzanne Sellers of the CWCB staff. I have Ted Kowalski also with me. And in the back, we also have Susan Schneider, who's representing us with legal counsel. Okay, go ahead. So this slide just represents where in the basin the Glenwood Springs RICD is, and you can see it's right smack dab in the middle of the basin, which is important because the closer you get to the state line, the more impact that an RICD can have on river administration upstream. And so one of the questions that was posed to staff was, why does 17 days of call matter? And I would say that because we're right there in the middle of the basin, the 17 days of call impact more water users upstream of that RICD than some of the other RICDs that you've considered in the past. Go ahead. Okay, we can probably move on from this slide. Okay, so you've seen this slide before, but I just wanted to remind you, your charge is to consider whether the RICD would materially impair the ability of Colorado to fully develop and place to consumptive beneficial use its compact entitlements. And again, staff believes that this RICD would impair that ability. Your second charge is to consider whether the RICD would cause material injury to the existing in-stream flow rights on the Colorado. We do not believe that would be the case. However, we do believe that the RICD would not promote maximum utilization of the waters of the state. And just for reference in your packets, the board rules are included, and there are many, many sub-factors that the staff considered in developing these three recommended findings for the board. So one of the things that has been brought up today is this question of whether the applicant is asking for more than 50% of the flow in the river. This slide simply shows that the applicant is asking for just less than 50%. There's a distinction between the two RICDs that are close to town and the one at the no-name site with about 1.3% difference in volume as a result of the no-name creek coming in below that top RICD. Okay, so going back to this 50% question. So as your staff, one of the things that I believe my duty is to help you sort through these technical issues and help you understand what's really going on. And so this slide is to help you understand that. The applicant has claimed their flow rates based on a 30-year hydraulic period of record, where Homestake has claimed a 20-year period. I can say that the difference in those 10 years is negligible. I did an analysis, and that represents 0.4% of the difference in the two volumes calculated. So it may seem like an important fact, but 0.5% roughly. I don't think that's really the concern. The next issue that's been brought up is whether or not the applicant should have used the .0 gauge to calculate their historic flow, or whether they should have done it similar to Homestake et al., which used 2 gauges below the RICDs. I think this is probably the harder question. The difference between using those two methods is about 3.3%. And the thing that's tough is that's within the gauge error for these gauges. So the difference between the two is 4.3%. And if you have a gauge error of 10%, it really becomes a little bit of a policy decision on how conservative does the board want to be in deciding what this 50%, how to determine 50% of the historical flow. Staff Staff believes that the applicant's methodology is reasonable. We would have also said that Homestake's methodology is reasonable, but for one thing that they did do that we weren't quite behind was they used the annual flows when comparing the historical record, and while the applicant calculated it based on the RICD season, and that again is only about 0.5% difference, so it's not a big deal. But that's why in our memo we is supporting the applicant's estimate. Again, however, this is all within the gauge error, and so it really comes back to the board and how conservative does the board want to be, and recognizing that stream gauges are just not that accurate unless weirs or other concrete structures are put into the river. We can skip this one. Okay, so similar to what I believe Homestake did is we looked at the historical flow in the river, and then we looked at the historical call. And based on those numbers, we estimate that this RICD will add an average of 17 days of call. And then, at its worst in 2004, it will be 59 days of call. One thing that was brought up is that that Shoshone is not a permanent. Now, it's not given that Shoshone will always be there and calling. However, staff believes that maintenance of that historical call would be beneficial to the operation in the Colorado River for those downstream folks. And so we don't necessarily see that if the RICD were to call at times when Shoshone did call in the past, we don't necessarily see that as something that would be a bad thing for Colorado. And so just to answer Director George's question about that particular item. Okay, we can keep going. This slide helps you understand with a little more detail how the call may affect the RICD, or excuse me, how the RICD may affect the call regime. On average, the RICD may call 5 times or so during the Shoshone period, when I should say during the flow rate that matches the Shoshone call. So the one reason why our estimates differ from the applicants is because they are not counting times when Shoshone is not calling that they may call. And so there is some effect for calling during that 1250 CFS flow rate. Then at the higher flow rate, that's 2500 CFS, the call on average will be about 10 days a year. And then during the event flows at 4000 over those 5 days, on average, that would result in about 2 days of call. And so based on those days of call, staff has estimated on average that these RICDs would call down roughly 53,000 acre feet of water that's not being called down by historical calls. Let's go ahead. This is a hydrograph that I like to include in all my analyses. Apologize for its busyness. The purple line is the 50% exceedance. So that's what the historic hydrology looks like 50% of the time. The RICD call, or RICD calls would be in the blue. And then the red and orange dotted lines, those represent how much flow has historically passed those locations when there's been a call. And so you can see that on average, if Cameo or Shoshone has called in the past, on average, it's calling down roughly 14 or 1500, well, it'd be more, even though it's calling 1200, the flows are often a little higher than that, and they would exceed the lowest flow rates, which is the 12, sorry, Ted, this one down here. Yeah, thanks. They would exceed what the RICDs are asking for. And then the red line shows the maximum flows. Thank you. The red line shows the maximum flows that have occurred through the RICDs when there's been historical calls. So hopefully what you'll see is for the lowest flow rates being requested, it won't have a huge impact on how the river is administered upstream and downstream. However, as soon as you go up to the higher flow rates, especially outside of that peak period, the impact of the RICDs will then start to add a new call to the river and impact exchanges through the reach, as well as pull water through the river, pull water down through the RICDs. So one of the things that Director Montgomery brought up was the reduced call subordination clause. And I would caution the board in believing that this clause is a carve out. It's sort of a carve out. And I'm not sure if you want me to, I have the language here, but it's several slides long. So if it's your desire, you can read it. But
as long as it won't take more than 3 minutes, you can read it.
Well, let's go through it. Or but here's the problem with this subordination clause. First of all, it doesn't include projects that would be trans mountain diversions. And so they're not going to get a break in this carve out. The second thing is it's unclear how the River District would determine that there would be impairment to the junior, what's the wording, project flows. And then the third issue is that there's the 20,000 acre foot carve out will be reduced by existing conditional water rights that are then built after the decree is signed. And I started to do a little bit of research on how that would be, what the real impact on this is. And so I looked at the conditional water rights above the RICD, and there's 4,000 records in the tabulation. I took out the wells, and then that leaves 2,000. So, and then I realized there's many, many duplicates. So it would be quite a task to figure out the answer to that. But in scrolling through the 2,000 records, there's a lot of conditional water rights upstream of the RICDs that can completely obliterate that 20,000 acre feet. And so I just want you to be aware that it is a carve out, but it may not be. We can skip this one, I think. Do you want to talk on this one? Okay, we'll skip this one.
We're short on time, but I think that some of the testimony that you heard here today and the written testimony that was submitted on demand, I think is persuasive specifically because That's showing existing demand without the RICD in place. And here you're having an RICD structure that would build that hopefully would make it more efficient with regard to recreational uses. And we just found that to be persuasive and convincing.
And then real quick, there's several topics that have been raised by objectors that are not considered in the board's findings. And so we wanted to let you know that if the board is compelled to want to address those, that's something we could talk about in executive session, and you could direct staff to address that in the water court case. However, I suggest you not focus on these items today because they are not part of your findings that you're considering today. And then I'm not going to repeat this, but we've provided you abbreviated findings of fact. And then go ahead. And then our recommendation is that you adopt those abbreviated findings of fact along with the comprehensive findings of fact in the board memo. And then that you instruct staff to participate in the water court to defend those findings of fact. Lastly, the findings of fact are due to water court August 14th. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board members? Director Montgomery?
Just going back to your point about the not really a carve out, but you were saying to keep in mind that it includes the conditional water rights, and that to be somewhat concerned about that. But I guess my issue is if they're conditional water rights, they're not, if they're senior conditional water rights, they're not impacted by this anyway.
Well, you're right, but the way that the clause is written is that there's a carve out for new water rights, except that 20,000 acre feet gets reduced by conditional water rights that come online. So if there was a conditional water right that was 10,000 acre feet and got developed before one of those water rights, a project that didn't have water rights, that would reduce that 20 to 10, if that makes sense. And we really need a crystal ball to know whether or not that would happen.
Suzanne, just going back to the hydrologic analysis of the applicant and the objector, there was a concern about that the applicant had not subtracted out reservoir releases. Is that included in the 4.3% difference between their estimates of flows?
No, it's not. And I did have a question about the reservoir releases as well, but to us, it's not clear how much of those 100,000 acre feet would then fall within that Shoshone flow rate, which then we believe would be beneficial to maintain. And so I don't believe, and maybe Homestay can correct this if that's the case, but I'm not sure that it would impact given that consideration.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public in the audience who would like to speak who are not affiliated with any of the parties to this hearing? Please let us know. Please state your name and any affiliation for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
My name is Peter Benedict. I'm involved in this in 3 ways. I'm a math teacher and run the river program at the Colorado Rocky Mountain School in Carbondale, Colorado, which has 50 years of historic use on this stretch using kayaking and canoes and rafts. I am also the main, I've organized more kayaking events in the Glenwood area than anyone else. And both through a high school series that I started with various other high schools throughout the state. And I am a private user of this reach with my 3 kids. I'm here to say that there's a pretty big difference between 1250 and 2500 in a couple of ways. One, if the Colorado River in this reach could very easily be characterized by wahoo, and then you wait till you get to the finish. What I'm excited about as a private user and a commercial user of this stretch is that it's going to provide more access points and more places along the river where I can have my kids out to play in the water, provide more beach access and all that kind of stuff. That experience by the different flows is quite different. If you've ever been on this stretch of river, you would know that it's characterized by upstream winds and by a lot of gravel bars, as Jeff pointed out earlier. And so as you float and paddleboard and kayak down, being there at 2500 is really nice. And there's a lot of waves and you're kind of moving down the whole time. At 1250, it's still a great stretch of river. And I take my students down it in the fall and spring quite often at very low flows. But it's a very different experience when you take them down when there's actual water. As an event organizer, this spring I held U.S. team trials for the freestyle worlds. It's going to happen in August up in the Ottawa River, and so we selected the team at the Glenwood Wave. As an event organizer in this state, having access to water late in the season is really important, and having consistent access to water. It's really exciting to think about being able to count on a certain flow for a given event to make it a large scale event. The team trials, which is probably one of the most competitive freestyle kayaking events in the country, we intentionally left it very low key for a couple reasons. One, every single weekend from May 15th through June 25th is booked. We ended up having to do team trials, the most competitive event in the country, on a Monday and Tuesday. Anyway, so it's important and there's a difference. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any other member of the public who would like to speak? Okay, so the last presentation will be the City of Glenwood Springs rebuttal. They have 15 of their own minutes and then 3 minutes that has been ceded to them. So you have 18 minutes, and then we'll be breaking for lunch and coming back for deliberations.
I'm Scott Shipley. I spoke earlier about the structural engineering and the minimum required flow rates for these whitewater structures. And I realized that I started out without introducing myself, as Darren did. Just by way of background, I'm a professional engineer licensed in the state of Colorado. I've done a number of whitewater parks, over 10 to 12 years experience in the field, including some of the largest whitewater parks in the world. The London Olympic Course was the most notable of those parks. In addition to that, I spent 27 years racing kayaks professionally. I raced in 3 Olympics. I was a 3-time world champion, and I was ranked first in the world over about a 10-year period. I've also been a coach, an instructor, and done a large amount of recreational kayaking. And so if I were to characterize my resume versus Darren's, I would call myself a whitewater designer who has done some amount of physical modeling. If I were to look at his resume, I would say he has done some amount of physical modeling and is also has done some whitewater park design. And I think the differences show in the criticisms that he has of our design. When I take one example, the bypass channels that are shown and his criticism of the side of the river that they're on, and I'll put this into lay terms to some degree. If my granddad were to walk out of this building and down the stairs, he would choose to use the handicap ramp. He has trouble walking, and he wouldn't fall. He'd hold the rail and he wouldn't fall. Most people who fall going down those stairs would fall on the stairs, and the same is true of whitewater parks. When you look at these structures and where the bypass channel is in relation to the access rescuability of that site, the primary hydraulic is where 99% of the flips and where the rescues and where people need to regain their control occurs. That is why we put the main hydraulic closest to where the people can access it. Similarly, the City of Glenwood Springs would like to host freestyle events with thousands and thousands of spectators, as they do at other RICD whitewater park sites. When you look at the way that these parks are designed, we have designed them such that that main hydraulic is prominent where people can watch them. And just as you wouldn't want people to come and watch these proceedings from across the hallway and through that wall, we're not asking those people to come and watch the whitewater events that Peter referenced across the river and through the island. So these are appropriately designed. They're designed from a whitewater park user's perspective, and they've been designed to provide recreation for that whitewater. When we talk about the basis of design and whether we've done enough complete engineering on that, Darren actually admitted in his design that if we were doing a feasibility and concept analysis, that would be the use of the Weir equation and the FSI would be sufficient in that case. We have done a feasibility and concept design. That is the hurdle that we needed to meet. And I thank him for approving of that process. It certainly is accurate. When we look at this FSI, which is really the only metric, a lot of things were discussed. The design isn't good enough. It should have been modeled more. It should have been looked at in a different way. We don't have enough data. The analysis that we use for the freestyle surface index is much like the analysis that an electrician would use when they want to light this room. They would come up with a certain amount of wattage necessary to light this room for a certain width of room. At that point in time, they know how much energy that they require. That is the analysis that we use with the freestyle surface index. We decide for the size of river how much energy is there. The shape and characteristics of that is subject for future detailed design of the structures to create the waves and features that we want to create. But based on numerous structures that have been constructed, up to 70 in the state of Colorado, we know what the power requirements are to provide the applicant's intended recreational purpose.
Scott, could I ask you to halt for just a minute?
Sure.
I mean, this debate between you and Darren is fascinating, but I want to tell you that it really doesn't address any of the issues that we need to decide here today.
How so?
I would focus on the three issues that we have to talk about, or that we have to decide on. And that's whether it materially impairs compact use, whether it's material injury to existing in-stream flow rights, or maximum utilization.
Okay.
Tell me how this debate affects any of those things, because I would say to Darren that 95% of what he told us is irrelevant to what we have to do today.
I'll tell you the relevance specifically related to the freestyle surface index. It's a measure of power that goes through the structure. And if we take additional water, that would imply the need for additional power and implies the need for additional water. And so what I'm trying to make the case for is that we have allocated the correct amount of water in our claim to efficiently provide for the minimum recreational experience that meets the applicant's objective.
We don't get to decide minimum recreational experience. That's for the water court.
I'm just trying to convince you that I used some math and did it efficiently. And so,
but again, this is an argument to be made in the water court. It's not relevant to what we have to do today. So I would use your time more efficiently.
Okay, and let's go to the usage slides then. And these slides were presented also by Wilson Water, and I didn't catch the name of the individual who presented. Tyler Benton presented some usage slides. And I would ask that you ignore these slides completely. I realize that's rude to say, but these slides are based on commercial data, commercial usage data that was collected, and it was used to imply that there's more usage at lower flow rates than there is at higher flow rates. And what we know about that usage data is somebody stands there at the Grizzly ramp and counts the number of commercial users that put in or take out at that ramp. And the implication from these slides is that more users put in and take out at that ramp at lower water level than they do at higher water level. And I want to point out some of the deficiencies in the data that was presented. This is solely commercial rafting data, and so it does not count private users. The primary users of our whitewater park that will be additional new users are private users who will come to pursue freestyle kayaking. In addition, at the 4,000 CFS level, all of those rafting companies, these are all commercial rafters. All of those commercial rafters and those rafting companies are sent to other rivers, the Roaring Fork, the Crystal, other places. There is no commercial rafting license above 5,000 CFS at the Shoshone, which is a huge portion of these numbers counted at the Shoshone ramp. I would add that at the 4,000 CFS level, those rafters are double counted. So when the commercial rafters go through at 4,000 or less, they're offered a 2-a-day experience. And so they go down the river once because it's a very short section and go down again. And so to imply and to use these graphs to imply that there's more usage on this river and that there will be more usage at lower levels once we've completed our project is wholly inaccurate. these numbers are skewed dramatically by the way that the river is actually operated in real life. And based on your comments, I don't think I have anything further to say, except for that none of the evidence or the criticisms of the process that we have had have used to date would in any way change my opinion that we have claimed the minimum flow is required to meet the applicant's intended purpose.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Kelly again. For those who may have forgotten, I'm just going to touch upon a few items that were addressed primarily by Wilson Water Group in their presentation, but also touched upon by Suzanne. Specifically regarding the flow correlation, I think there was a little bit of a mischaracterization in terms of our reliance upon the .0 gauge. And I think that it was implied that we adjusted that for inflows without an additional stream flow gauge. And I think they were really talking about the location. I don't know if do you have that slide handy in their presentation of the gauge locations? It's important to understand that the methodology that we used was based upon a correlation of two USGS streamflow gauges. One was located right in the middle of the three whitewater parks, just upstream of the confluence, and the other was the .0 gauge that they referenced. We had a 26-year period of overlap for those two gauges with an extremely strong correlation. The reason that we chose that methodology and basically extrapolated that using the .0 moving forward in time, because that gauge above the confluence is no longer in place, was because the alternative was to use the Roaring Fork. And you're dealing with a stream system. We have very small tributaries in relative proportion coming in the canyon relative to the Roaring Fork. So if I'm going to have to adjust a stream flow gauge station, I'm going to do it to account for the smaller flows and not try to take a downstream gauge and take out perhaps the largest tributary on the Colorado at this point, which is the Roaring Fork. So that was, I just wanted to clarification there. Regarding the reservoir releases, it's certainly pointed out that we cannot call for those reservoir releases, but we can use them to satisfy our flow claims. We're not looking to stack those releases on top of the flows that we are claiming, and we feel like that promotes maximum utilization. In addition, we feel like those flows were, I think the statute identifies that it's the flows historically available at your RISD location. And I think those flows were historically available even if we didn't necessarily have control over those flows. And I also think the reservoir releases, I think the implication with regard to the 100,000 acre feet was that that might be subtracted from that 500,000 acre feet of available water. But in reality, reservoirs more accurately reflect timing of flows rather than magnitude of flows on an annual basis. They store water and then they release water. So it's not like that water would have been completely removed from the system if we had accounted for the reservoir releases. We touched upon the differences in methodology. Suzanne had identified that her approach, and as well as Homestake, was to look at historical Shoshone calls, whereas we chose to look at potential. Part of the reason for that was we felt that both the RISD potential calls should be compared on a similar basis. And that's why we looked at Shoshone. But also, we recognize that through the different provisions in our cooperative operations that we're proposing, that if there's a reason that Shoshone isn't calling in the future, that there may be a reason that the Glenwood RISD doesn't call as well. And that was part of the whole cooperative approach that we're taking. So we thought it was important that they be compared apples to apples, as it might be. The only other items I would touch upon quickly would be, we were pleased to see that Wilson Water Group's presentation had come down from their engineering report, which identified that there was approximately 550,000 acre feet of upstream demand per the SWASI. And now we recognize that they're down below 250,000, which we think certainly makes it easier for the available flows to satisfy that future demand. And as we've touched upon with regard to optics, we noticed the exhibit that they have here today and the difference that they chose to present that exhibit as opposed to the one that was in their engineering report, which emphasized the existence of existing risids on the upper stream system. They're still shown as dots, but the entire upper Colorado above the points on the map are already encumbered by existing risid application or decrees, I should say. And they had identified only that portion that we were adding to it below those existing risids as the new impact. And of course, now it's the entire basin, and with downplaying the presence of the existing decreed risids on the upper Colorado. Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Board, I appreciate your time today. This has been a long, continuous run, and we're almost there. We started talking about optics and perspective, and we'd like to finish there. This morning, Jeff Hexel, the city manager, testified with a picture behind him that showed some rafters on the left. And if you look closely at that picture, you can see kids in the boat, as he pointed out, having a water fight. And that was on Monday last week. It flows of about 4,400 to 4,600. There's some fluctuation, given the time of day, but flows in excess of our maximum flow rate are such that kids are comfortable having a water fight out there. We just want to keep it in perspective when it's characterized that this event flow or the 2,500, moreover, are unreasonably high. We think the same is true with regard to the rates and the claims or the dates of the claims. Again, 46 days potentially above Shoshone with call reduction provisions, 1.5 months out of a 12-month year, 15 days average potential additional call out of a 365-day year, and even those days aren't a 24-hour call. The Homestake Partners presentation includes that all of the flow rates should be cut below 35%, but no criticisms for not enough engineering methodology on the applicant side, but no calculations to justify why 35% or why in particular with 1250, the appropriate rate should be 800, a rate which is virtually never in that river. And according to Mr. Hexel, at a point where boats are routinely hitting rocks all the way through. And as Director McLeod pointed out, a great portion of the additional testimony was irrelevant to your decision today. As far as CWCB staff's recommendation, the final draft recommendation that was provided in the packet includes several findings to the effect that any flow above 1250 may conflict with maximum utilization or compact or both. Peter Fleming, I thought, did a terrific job explaining why there really isn't a compact issue here. And as far as maximum utilization, would not be a meaningful water right if it had 0 days of potential call. But staff's recommendation doesn't say if any days would be a potential call, rather that it seems to point to none. And we think that is beyond where the board or the court's role in determining maximum utilization needs to go with a RISD appropriation in this location. The statutes admittedly put your board in a very complex position here, one that you're very familiar with, and I don't pretend to know more about than you do. But my view is that you have an advisory role, which you're exercising right here on 3 statutory criteria. It's important to remember that even after you've completed that function, your board and your staff and your attorneys remain objectors in the water court case and have the opportunity to address additional issues. That will take place no matter how your recommendation goes at this point. One of the things the statutes don't do, however, is put your board in a mediator role. And I think it would be remiss of me not to note the difficult role that Glenwood has put in. We're negotiating, as Casey Funk pointed out, and I don't mean to contradict him, but I think we're making really great progress and we're very close. I'm more optimistic than what he indicated. But with the Homestake Partners, we're not negotiating. We would like to be. We aren't at present, and I think that's partially awaiting the outcome of your recommendation. And if the negotiation is solely about potentially using a compact, call reduction provision to the benefit of other parties, I think the city's open to that. But if it also entails a 35% reduction across the board, and especially at the 1250 level, bringing it to a number that doesn't exist, it puts the city of Glenwood Springs in an impossible position. So we respect your complex role. This process puts us in a complex role too, and we thank you for your time.
Yes.
I have a question, Mark.
Yes.
Well, when you signed the CRCA, you made a deal with Denver that they wouldn't oppose your RICD as long as it didn't exceed the 1250.
Correct.
And then you filed for more.
Correct.
Explain to me how that's consistent with your agreement in the CRCA.
The CRCA provision that Casey Funk referred to as a non-opposition provision, obviously it contemplates that Denver could oppose over the limits, and not just the 1250, but it also mentions replication of Shoshone operations and protection of their yield under the UCCP project that Casey referred to. We determined after engaging with the city and the rafting community and the kayakers, as testified to today, that there's great recreational demand and need above 1250. We went to Denver early and began discussions that are leading to where we are now about how to reconcile that with their concerns, and we remain committed to completing it. We think we can do it consistent with the spirit and the letter of the CRCA, and we have a draft settlement that is in process that will hopefully achieve that goal.
Thank you.
Commissioner Montgomery?
One more question for you.
Yes.
Based on the current staff recommendation and the timing of your negotiations that are going on right now, how does today's decision affect your timing? If it was in your hands, would you want more time and have our decision delayed? Or is it a preference that our decision be held now so that you can move on with some of your other negotiations?
Well, I think, again, if it's a focused discussion on, I don't know how to put it, the carve-out / call reduction provisions that may be extended here, I think that's one thing. If it's to put the city in a position to negotiate those and then end up with a large fight over flow reduction, I think that's a different question. And I wish I could answer you more clearly. We recognize that your board has authority today to issue a positive recommendation, a negative recommendation. We understand that recommendation will be considered by the water court either way. And we understand that we have the right to rebut that at the water court, at which point the water court needs to make a decision based on the evidence presented. And so while we very much welcome your positive recommendation on both of the issues outstanding today, we are prepared to move forward if we don't have that in our hands at the time we get to court. But we certainly prefer to garner your support if we can.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so we're going to close the record, and you all can get your lunch and take a little break, and then we'll come back here and you can begin your deliberations. During deliberations, we ask that you only ask clarifying questions of the staff if needed, but not ask questions that will elicit additional information where we have to reopen the record. If it's necessary, we can do that, though. Thank you.